All right. It is that it's that time of year again, the end of the year, where I bring Gray Crawford on to join me in the year ahead episode. Thanks for joining me again, Gray.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about 2022.
2022. Can you even I don't know where 2021 went.
It's a good question.
It blew away with the wind. It was here one moment, it was gone the next. I feel like I attribute that maybe to the nodes still in the mutable signs of Gemini and Sagittarius, where it feels like time just flew by. But so much has changed, right? If you look at the beginning of January versus here in December now. I don't know about you, Gray. Well, maybe I do know about you, but life has changed completely, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really what we would have expected for this year was just great amount of change. And that is what we can expect for next year as well. It's just going to keep changing. Even more so going further into the changes already happening.
Yeah, we are tumbling further into, I feel like we're like tumbleweeds where, the tumbleweed's not stopping. It's rolling. It's going to keep rolling and rolling and rolling. And we are just rolling with it basically at this point, which is interesting because that's what, people say about life. The one constant is that it always changes. And you're like, yeah. But sometimes life changes at different speeds. Because there's the small changes, there's the big changes. And it seems like this whole last couple of years and this year ahead in 2022 are these really big life changes that are taking place.
Yeah. And we can see anyone that looks ahead to coming transits later in this decade, there's even more change. We're sort of accelerating into like things where, it's a time where things are completely changing everywhere on, from the microscopic to macrocosmic, just like big societal collective, as well as personal. So there's a lot of mirroring going on with that, just total dismantling of old structures and systems and new things emerging and changing.
Yeah. And it really speaks to your personal makeup at this point, right? Or, are you one of those people that they're always waiting for change, like bring me the change, I'm restless, let's go? Or are you one of those people that are like, I have been sitting in the same place since 1962, I don't want to move? I'm picking on my mom right now, but it just, I don't know, it's how easy this is for people seems to be based on how well do you roll with the punches, how well are you able to change. But I think even the people that are most like unwilling to change, not even unwilling, just haven't even had like motivation to, for whatever reason. And I fall into that, the boat of people. I've been in the same house for 17 years and now I'm looking at moving, it's just, I guess it's one of those things where it's just time, right? They say, what happened? What's changing? Why are you doing this? It's just time. And you feel that happening.
Yeah, definitely.
So, well, before we get started here, just in case you're new to the podcast or you're watching this broadcast on YouTube, because we will be doing sharing some charts and stuff. So a visual could be helpful, especially for some of these longer broadcasts. But just in case you are not aware of Gray, give us a quick little background on yourself.
Yeah, I'm an astrologer who lives in Olympia, Washington. I have a website called graycrawford.net where I write regularly about kind of what's just going on with transits in astrology, especially always the new moon, full moon. I do natal astrology. I do horary astrology. I have a Patreon that if you're interested in supporting my work, you can join. And right now there's one monthly meeting on there that I do around the crescent light after each new moon. And might be adding some more to what I'm doing with that in the coming year, but that's what it's at now. And sometimes I'm offering classes and I speak out in the community too sometimes, and you can check my site for that kind of thing.
Oh, and you will be speaking at a conference later in 2022, right?
Oh yeah, I'm going to be at ESAR. Yeah. In late August, I believe.
Yeah. So I can attest to Gray's teaching skills. I've definitely studied with him on a few occasions and definitely check out his work. But yeah, so all right. Well, we got so much to tackle here for 2022. I figured we'll do a astrology podcast style. And I'll share the chart real quick for
Okay.
when we started talking here. We are recording this December 8th, 2021, Wednesday. We started at 1:36 p.m. Well, here in San Diego, but Gray's over there in Olympia, Washington. Yeah, what do we got lots of stuff going on in the sky as we're recording this, because obviously we're inching ever closer to the last Saturn Uranus square. We got Venus and Pluto meeting in the skies, and Mars just squaring Jupiter. And more, so many things going on. Aries Ascendant.
Yeah, I mean, I was just noticing personal reasons, my Chiron's right on the ascendant and my Venus is nearby, so I think that's I'm happy about that.
He's happy about that. Well, the moon's right on my IC, so I'm feeling at home with this, with my intuition in this conversation. We'll see how it goes there. But yeah, I thought that would be fun. So there it is. That's the chart we're doing this under. So, all right, well, let us get into a little bit of an overview of 2022, just before we get into the seasonal quarters and, the ingress charts, et cetera. It's like, what can we expect from 2022? Gray, what's your first thing that you're like, okay, this is big happenings next year?
As far as like transit scale, you mean?
Yeah. What
like
do
where they really meet? Yeah, I mean, I think like we were talking about, it's a lot of change and embracing sort of flux, fluidity, formlessness, but also obviously we're going to be bringing things into form, but there needs to be sort of an embrace of working with things disintegrating and changing and being curious about that and exploring that. And that can be seen with we enter the year, Venus is retrograde, and then Mercury goes retrograde soon after. We end the year, Mars is retrograde, Mercury goes retrograde. So the beginning of the year is Venus retrograde, Mercury retrograde. The end of the year is Mars retrograde, Mercury retrograde. There's actually 4 Mercury retrogrades, but the last one is more in 2023. It just stations at the very end of 2022. But technically Mercury stations retrograde 4 times. Venus retrograde, Mars retrograde, bookends the year. And in between, the major things are the Jupiter-Neptune cycle coming in really strong, Jupiter-Neptune conjunction that later in the year comes into contact with the Mars retrograde in Gemini.
Yep.
And then Jupiter also going into Aries for a little bit, coming back to Pisces. So it's a clear, we're leaving Saturn, Jupiter in Aquarius time, Jupiter in Pisces, Jupiter in Aries, Jupiter going back and forth across the 0 Aries point.
True.
And then the other major thing is the nodes changing. So North Node going into Taurus and South Node into Scorpio. The mean calculation happens before we get to 2022, and the true node calculation happens pretty early in 2022. So that one's very clear. And that then involves eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio, the North Node coming to Uranus in Taurus with eclipses on Uranus, and then the nodes also then squaring Saturn. So Saturn in Aquarius squaring the South Node in Scorpio, the North Node in Taurus with Uranus and Taurus. And then there's a missing piece in Leo, which will get filled in during the year, but very strong emphasis on Aquarius, Scorpio, Taurus. But I think that missing Leo piece is something to think about too.
I absolutely, when I got to Leo season, I was like, it seemed like almost a missing piece of the puzzle that was filling in all like the T-square action after the T-square kind of has already introduced itself. It like fills in, like you said, the gap. So I think Leo season will be especially interesting.
So that's why the reason I'm saying so much change is because we have, all those retrogrades, Venus, Mars, Mercury, We have Uranus coming into contact with the North Node with eclipses on Uranus, squaring Saturn. That's a huge change. And then Jupiter conjunct Neptune in Pisces is just sort of a massive underlying change happening underneath all, as part of all of this. So it's really, it's a lot of change.
It's lots of change. It's very big.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting to think about because one of the defining factors of 2022 is actually the lingering of the Saturn Uranus square because they don't actually meet again. They make their final pass at the end of December and then they just stay in close proximity, and close enough. And they get really close actually
really
at different times of 2022. But it's interesting to think about now how these planets are in these very activating positions with the nodes. So they've already done their tension and introducing, in 2021, but these kind of the destined shifts or the destined shifts that lead to some sort of restabilization or destabilization to restabilize, that seems to be, it's much more aligned with the eclipses in the nodal story this year. And so I find it interesting, like, even though they don't meet again, they're talking through these really, kind of fateful points of the nodes, and they get their voice through that, through not even just the eclipses, of course, but just the nodal action there. And so, and it's interesting too, because it first starts before we even get to the Taurus, the Taurus Scorpio nodal shift. We have Jupiter, when Jupiter moves into Pisces, is going to be at the bendings of the nodes on January 3rd. So it's like we get one last, larger planetary emphasis. So there's that Jupiter node action first things first, I guess.
Yeah. And what's also interesting is, using the true node, but then when you're using the mean calculation, which is like the average motion of the nodes, some years the true node will change signs first. This year it's the mean nodes changing first. And that actually happens basically right at I think it's like the day after the solstice. So as soon as that will actually happen kind of like right in tandem with right before Jupiter goes into Pisces. But you're right, using the true nodes, when Jupiter goes into Pisces, it's squaring the nodes right away. But that whole transition, it's like squaring the nodes from really either calculation, like the last part of Jupiter getting last part of Jupiter, and because from the mean perspective, it would already be squaring the nodes like exactly as it moves into Pisces. So it's a very interesting. It's like Jupiter is going into Pisces, like squaring the nodes, and that, you're right, definitely brings a big focus to Jupiter right away. And I think that speaks to what is the what can Jupiter help us with in terms of the year ahead for how do we how do we step back from whatever difficult situation we're in or stress or anxiety related to some specific thing happening right then, to keep in mind this bigger picture and larger vision of what's taking shape within all of these changes, because that is really what Jupiter is going to be offering this year. And while it's squaring the nodes, Jupiter's been ruling that south node of Sagittarius, and we've already been having all these eclipses in Sagittarius with the south node in Sagittarius, and part of the year had Jupiter in Pisces for that. And so there's already been something activating that, just as far as like an archetypal meaning of Sagittarius. And one of the things associated with Sagittarius is having inspired vision of meaning for what you want to do. And especially in terms of like seeing something a little bit more so than Pisces. It's like kind of like fiery, spirited pull, over the horizon to what's beyond. Whereas Pisces is a little bit more inner journey, inner exploration, which I think in that terms is another big theme of the year. Is no matter what's going on out in the world and whatever sort of chaos is going out there, paying attention to, what is that inner chaos going on, and especially in terms of what can be created out of that. And there could be profound inner journeys with Jupiter and Neptune and Pisces. But then in terms of the nodal switch that happens with this, it's making me think about Scorpio, South Node, all of this accumulated grief and emotional stuff and all these power dynamics and power battles and corruption and manipulation. There's all this material up, and the South Node going into Scorpio makes me think a lot about how are we going to be, collectively and personally processing all this material, transmuting it into Taurus, which I think is really going to necessitate and goes well with Jupiter going into Pisces, slowing down, because Jupiter in Pisces is more the slow internal Jupiter, more so than the fast outward Sagittarius Jupiter, right? And Taurus can, if we're working to slow things down and process things with the Taurus side of the North Node as it's coming to Uranus, we're also talking about Taurus. Taurus can create boundaries. Taurus can create forms. And especially when Taurus is open to change, and Taurus has already been activated by Uranus so much wherever you have Taurus in your charts, and now it's going to have even more coming in because the North Node there, and so it's kind of forcing changes in a sign and placement. Sometimes Taurus has a reputation of not wanting to change. I mean, it's really good at building something solid and maintaining that. But so I think it's a process of engaging that side of it, being really willing to process all of this Scorpio material. I think that the shadow side would be, these power, the Scorpio shadow side, can be with power, instead of transmuting stuff and having compassion for people and, working compassion for the way people are wounded and really working on that and helping people process and being a companion and ally through, the sort of collective and personal underworld journey where we've all been on. Scorpio can turn, manipulative and, power, there's that side. And then likewise, Taurus can swing to a overly materialistic, and kind of shutting things down a little bit and not wanting to look at things under the surface. So that's why I think there's an importance in being open to processing all of that and working with those changes happening.
Yeah, there's it's so interesting thinking about the mean node versus the true node within this, and how we can actually do a little, I love experiments, right? The Gemini Scorpio in me, I'm let's do some investigation here, because we know this Jupiter energy at the beginning of the year is going to trigger the journey start. We're going to start to feel into the shift of the Scorpio and the Taurus that you're talking about. But it'll be interesting to think of when Jupiter squares the nodes, if you feel it more, around December 27th with the Aquarius, Taurus, Scorpio vibe, or if it's more around the 3rd where you pick up that Pisces, Gemini, Sagittarius vibe, or if it's actually both, where at the end of December, which there's a lot going on at the end of December, that's not just that meeting of the square of the nodes. If there's an introductory Jupiter moment at the end of Aquarius, and then a kind of wrapping up in some way of the other nodal story in the beginning of January, just a few days later. So I don't know if you're one of those nerdy people who like to research the very specifics of astrology. This is one of those good moments in the skies to kind of gauge what you feel around two different points, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying, Gray? This is
No, it does. I've actually for the last I don't know, at least decade or so, I've tried to pay attention to when this happens. I remember last time it was that when they went to Gemini, Sagittarius, if I'm remembering right, it was the true node that switched first. And I was trying to pay attention to that. And I was like, well, I feel like, you can be Aussie project into that, but I kind of felt like, oh, something's kind of changing. So seems like as soon as one of them goes, like there's some kind of change happening. And then there's like there'll be an interesting little window where there's a difference between the two.
Yeah, like that, almost like that little liminal space where you're like, you got the one foot in one and one in the other. But it's so interesting having Jupiter just square it at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's definitely something there about coming in strong. Yeah.
But
so it makes me think sort of like, I guess what I was saying, even like with Taurus and the North Node switching to that, and no matter what's going on in the world, where you're living, if you have some degree of resources, you can construct like the idea of like constructing like a beautiful garden for yourself, if you're able to do that where you live, just like what can you, in your world sort of create, the North Node, and because Taurus can get physical and get in the body and in your personal sphere, actually like put something together. It's going to still be needing to be open to change, but it will be a shift to Venus ruling that North Node.
Well, that's a great point, because, like having the North Node ruled by Mercury, who is has that duality function, is always on the go, is always on the move, is always busy, is like entertaining a lot, juggling a lot. And living in those two spaces, you think of him as the psychopomp that lives below and can transfer up to the top. There's just a lot of there's a lot with Mercury. It's always a lot going on, versus Venus, I mean, she's doing her own thing, obviously, with especially starting the year with her retrograde and having done so on Pluto, etc. But she's a little more laid back. She's a little more in tune with what she wants, the creative process, the luxuries of life, and also balance and equality and justice related things. It's a different vibe completely. And of course, her going through each of her signs, it will dictate how that North Node energy is felt. But I think that difference from a mercurial nodal, forward journey versus a Venusian one is going to be marked.
And there's something real important right when we go into this shift here. Who's waiting in Taurus for the North Node? It's Ceres retrograde in Taurus. And where is Venus? Venus is retrograde in Capricorn with Pluto. So that's a very obvious correlation with the story of Demeter, Ceres, Persephone, Kore. And one thing it makes me think of relates to what we were just talking about with like Capricorn, and because the other thing, the thing that really is super dramatic besides this is the Venus retrograde. The Venus she's stationing, I think, December 19th, so right before the solstice, she stations retrograde in Capricorn with Pluto. And so the whole first part of the year has that Venus retrograde in Capricorn. But that means when the nodes switch, which, depends a little bit which calculation we're using, but then we go into that North Node with it being ruled in Taurus, with it being ruled by Venus retrograde in Capricorn near Pluto, especially when we're using the mean node. And so one thing that, again, makes me think about is like with Taurus and Capricorn is boundaries of containment. How do we construct boundaries to let things in, what can be let in, not like we're so shut down, because you don't want to go too far to be like so shut down you're not letting anything in, but how do you also create the space, the time for timelessness and spaciousness, and creating the boundaries you need within relationships. So you're both getting the support you need. You're also creating space and containers to work with this really deep material that's going to be coming up. And that story of Demeter or Ceres with Hades, Pluto, Persephone, Proserpina, Kore, whichever names you want to use for them. It's a story that, that's sort of, it's the Demeter is linked to being the goddess of abundance and harvests, but also she brought the mysteries, and some of the mysteries were very specifically connected to that story. The mysteries were, collective rituals of initiation, and being, at night, like Persephone, carrying like the torches to like illuminate the night. And we're in this collective time of like, crossroads, mystery, needing to have the space for the grieving and working with it. I don't know, all those themes, I think it's very interesting that that's all there, and then Ceres is actually going to station direct not long after that in January, where she'll station direct and then be kind of right with the North Node, basically.
There in mid-January. That's an interesting point, though, to that kind of nighttime walk and looking at, and going to those deeper parts of ourselves, because, when we're thinking about Taurus and Scorpio, and these being the, kind of feminine signs ruled by night planets, versus our more outgoing Gemini, Sag energy that we just went through. And the fact that these are fixed signs, and, fixed places in our charts are usually the most, as they say, fixed, like these are like where we hold things down, or where we're a little bit more rigid, or want more structure there, or already have structure, etc. And so when we have to access these deeper places that are very rooted within our nature, it does take that inward journey. It does take that nighttime walk where we have to address things that are not surface level, and that like can pull down to very deep parts of ourselves, especially with all the Uranian action, as you pointed out earlier, that's been happening in Taurus. Like we've already been navigating this area, but this is this is the uprooting. Like this year will bring like the full excavation where, it'll just in Uranian fashion kind of get that volatile nature that will explode it, which is good because we, a lot of times we need release around things that are very buried and they take some time to get to. So look at those areas of your chart, and especially if you're like someone like me that has those on, the angles, if you have fixed angles, or for the Scorpio and Taurus risings, this will be probably pretty impactful. I mean, it's going to be impactful for everyone, of course, but that switch. Well, you're a mutable rising, so how was Gemini and Sag eclipses and nodal action for you?
So for me, lots of change happening, and for me personally, so much change happening. I've been focused mostly on processing and inner processing and relating, and not being very externally productive. And so for me, I'm hoping that, and I think it also depends on what stages of processes you've been in. For me, I'm hoping that this shift is more about then becoming more productive. And so for me, it's also been a nodal opposition. Besides being very mutable, my nodes are in Gemini, Sagittarius, my moon. So I had a nodal opposition. North node on my moon. My moon's on my south node, but it's like been north node on my moon and my south node transiting.
So having all that angular in a couple different ways, I'm sure, it just becomes potent.
And all my angles are mutable. My Mercury's on an angle mutable. So, So Jupiter is on an angle mutable.
So it attests to the fact that when the nodes come your way, especially if you have the nodes in those signs too, if you're reaching a nodal return or a reverse nodal return, you can expect it to be a big year for you, where, as they say, the wheel changes, and that's just the nature of life. But I find it very interesting that we start the year with Jupiter at the bendings of the nodes, regardless of whether we look at that mean or true or whatever. The fact that we're getting activation there because that's kind of how 2021 started too, with Jupiter making a square to Uranus first before Saturn was introduced to do the 3-part dance. So there was this Jupiterian component where some, the pathway opened up, the vision was followed upon, and then Saturn and Uranus, then Saturn came into the picture. And so it's kind of like that with the nodes too. It's like Jupiter gives us this introductory hit with the nodes. And then we move to the time where Saturn is going to square the nodes, actually at the same time, around the same time that Jupiter is going to sextile the nodes in mid-April. So we get that activation in the first part of the year for the nodes, but then the Saturnian component mixed with some Jupiter help will be in that April zone in the first couple of weeks of April. To then move on to obviously Uranus conjuncting the North Node, which we're going to feel for a good amount of time because, obviously Uranus moves slow, but sometimes the nodes can move very slow too. There are times when the nodes only move like 1 degree every couple months, depending on where it is in its in the path. But that's going to happen at least for true node status at the end of July, on July 31st. And so we're going to feel that in between, the summer months of just, that Uranus North Node component. So what do you think about that, Gray? Kind of like this incremental Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus with the nodes.
Yeah. It's going to get much stronger as we go, like you're saying, but I think right away, once the nodes switch, there's something to be said for this is already happening. And so it's not really like the Saturn Uranus we're already used to. It's the same themes that's already been going on. It's going to just be sort of ramped up in a way, and especially that Uranian component. So maybe even more on the unrest and dismantling and disruptions and wanting things to change, things that have been stuck changing. Saturn will still be wanting to slow things down at times, but Saturn's is going to be in less of a position to be really like shutting everything down. Saturn's going to need to be opening up with Aquarius. And I think what I like about the Taurus, and also starting here with like the Capricorn emphasis too, is that there needs to be this way to sort of ground. So, the Aquarian energy is great for like the vision and seeing how things can be taken apart and fragmented and decentering enough and to figure out, where to go. But you don't want to also get too up in the air, too airy, too up in your head, too lost in the metaverse, so to speak, and all that stuff going on with like social media stuff and like
meta,
all that stuff. Because like virtual reality stuff has been building for a while, and it's always made sense. And many astrologers have mentioned, that Jupiter Neptune conjunction in Pisces seems pretty lined up for that stuff to start happening. And so it's not really surprising we can hear more people talking about more of that stuff now. But staying more grounded to work with the innovative changes. I think the thing that's really interesting that we haven't mentioned yet about this beginning of the year is at the very end of 2021, Mercury is in Capricorn, and it's around the 29th of December. Mercury forms a conjunction with Venus, and I think it's December 30th, Mercury conjoins Pluto.
Yeah.
And that's also Mercury what's also happening then is Mercury is crossing into, the retrograde shadow zone, because Mercury is going to ultimately come back. It's going to go into Aquarius a little bit in January. It's going to station,
I think on the 14th.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's going to
Yeah.
station retrograde on the 14th at about 10 degrees of Aquarius. So it's going to go about 10 degrees into Aquarius, station retrograde, basically squaring Uranus. It's going to go into
I
Aquarius
know.
to
Look
like
at
set
that.
off the Uranus Taurus. Oh yeah, great. You have it there. Yeah. And then it's going to go retrograde, and it's going to come back and conjoin the sun once we get ahead to like the um, Aquarius season and Aquarius period of time. Once the sun goes into Aquarius, that'll form the inferior conjunction pretty early Aquarius. So fairly close to that Jupiter Saturn
Yeah.
conjunction period. And then it'll go back into Capricorn, and it will end up stationing directly later with Pluto. And this is the theme of all of the Mercury retrogrades this year, except for the final one that is really more of a, it's barely a 2022 retrograde. The first one, Mercury stations in Aquarius, goes back to Capricorn. The second one, Mercury stations in Gemini, comes back, conjoins the sun early, like 0 Gemini, goes back to Taurus. The third one, stations retrograde in Libra, comes back, conjoins the sun like 0 Libra right on the equinox, goes back into Virgo. And at the very end of the year, it'll be all Capricorn Earth. So where we last year was Mercury retrograde in all air signs. This year we're in an elemental shift from Mercury being retrograde in air signs to earth signs, and then next year we'll have them in earth signs. So there's an interesting thing where Mercury's not going to station retrograde like conjunct Saturn when that happens, but it will be in Aquarius. So there's an interesting thing where the very first Mercury retrograde right away, we're sort of getting this interesting interplay with that, where it's squaring the Uranus, and it's going to go back to Capricorn and get involved with the sort of the same material that Pluto and Venus has already been stirring up.
Yeah.
And that transition from air to earth, I think, is interesting because it again speaks to the need to keep moving with. We're in this like air age, right? All the Jupiter Saturn conjunctions now in air signs, which was announced by that Jupiter Saturn conjunction at 0 Aquarius. And air is all about, rapid changes and flux, and that we're really moving into that this year. But then the Mercury retrograde is like having us work with that. But then how do we make that weird shift from like air back to earth, which they have nothing in common if we use the framework of air signs being hot or warm and moist, earth signs being cold and dry. There's no common ground between them, those elements. And so there's something really, it's sort of like a magical process, right, to work with that kind of shift back and forth. And there's something really interesting about Mercury helping us with this like kind of air age, but how do we, get back to the earth and actually work with our boundaries and our containers and our structures, and how do we open those up and change and move with what's happening.
Yeah. They don't have anything in common, but at the same time, I feel like it's kind of a blessing to have the retrogrades with this component, because it's, when we think of air, we think of possibilities, and when we think of earth, we think of practicalities. And so sometimes we start with tons of possibilities. And we have to get back to the practicalities of it. And so it makes me wonder, when you have ideas or visions, or you're coming up with, all the speculation, and it's all in the head, or the blueprint, or what we see in our minds. And then how do we, translate that to the real world? Just pretty much what you're saying. But Mercury helping us put those, perceptive pieces of the puzzle together. So we can start out with the vision and get to the point of the practicalities of actually manifesting it, if it should be manifested, if it can be manifested, or what else does it need there. And when we were talking about earlier about Saturn having to kind of open up a little bit more, especially with such a Uranian influence that's coming, and having the nodes there too, it makes me think also of the limitations of vision. And how, when we think we have it ideally exactly in our head, and a lot of times how we see it in our head is not the same perfection as form, and being able to be flexible enough, knowing that it doesn't have to be exactly how we see it. It can start to mold and shape in just a different way when we actually implement it in the real world reality. And so that was kind of one of the things that came to mind with that. And I think it's fascinating too, with you pointing out the fact that Mercury, we start the year basically right before 2022 starts, we have that Venus, Mercury, and Pluto conjunction all together, obviously giving us a foreshadow to the early February, which will have Mercury then station direct on Pluto to kind of recharge that story, or to give the next piece of puzzle to that. And then at the end of the year, with the final retrograde, that's really about 2023, the three of them meet again to have Mercury then conjunct on Pluto. So it's almost like there's something about the beginning of this year that then wherever it's picked up by the end of the year, it'll be revisited once again, in a different shape, in a different form, learning from what we've known so far, what we manifested, and being worked on even further. Cause it's like,
no, yes. And I did notice that's interesting. So yeah, like the year begins with Venus and Mercury kind of near Pluto, and then the year basically ends
with the three of them
Venus,
all together.
with Venus and Mercury with Pluto. So yeah, you're right that it's sort of, it's pretty interesting.
It's interesting, especially with the idea of how you came into this podcast. And the first thing you said is the element of change, and being open and receptive to that, understanding it, working it out mentally, talking about it, having serious conversations with, in society with our loved ones, et cetera, of how things are changing. I know that's probably going to be I imagine a lot of serious conversations happening at the end of 2021 that will lead us into what's next for 2022.
Yeah. So I guess, should we talk a little bit about the Venus retrograde more? Or I'm not sure.
Let's talk a little bit more about Venus retrograde when we go into January. But before we've done a lot of foreshadowing, but I did want to talk about, because we had an interesting point before we got onto recording, about the Uranus North Node conjunction.
Okay.
That's happening, and because it doesn't happen every day, obviously, and it doesn't happen every day in Taurus either. So it'd be kind of fun to just kind of go through that kind of energy. So just to sum it up, the last time Uranus met the North Node, just in general, not necessarily in Taurus, was in 2007. In March 2007. Then it was November 1991, September 76, September 61, just to go back a little bit. And Gray and I were noticing some fascinating kind of musical switches that were going on during those time periods. Like, there were very transitional spaces for innovative music kind of coming out and changing the trends of, kind of entertainment and things along those lines. So how do we so eloquently said it before we got on.
Well, if we go all the way back, we said 1961 was Uranus conjunct North Node in Leo. Obviously, massive civil rights things happening, and lots of things. That was the introduction to the 1960s. But just in terms of music, rock and roll, and the way that rock and roll came in as part of cultural change, I guess.
Yeah, because that's when it
really started getting going then, even more. I mean, it was already happening, but it started breaking out on more massive levels, where it's like, and because that's what we're talking about here, we're talking about these more like big collective shifts. So musically, that was one emphasis, as well as like folk music and soul music.
Well, and you think about folk music, Gray, the fact that folk and soul music, because folk music usually they were singing about a message, sing about a message of change of like a political movement. And same with soul, people that had messages of repression and letting that out through the music. And then just the Beatles and the Stones starting at that time too. That was going to usher in the whole rock and roll revolution, with this conjunction happening in Leo, like they're the expressive Leo there. So sorry to cut you off. I was like, I got inspired by that.
Yeah. No, don't. And then jump into next one is 1976, right? In Scorpio.
Yeah.
And so this is an interesting one because, well, there's obviously people born on the planet right now with a 1961 one, but the 76 one in Scorpio is interesting because I just know a lot of people born this year in this time period, but obviously now we're in North Node Uranus and Taurus, so it's opposite. It's the same signs, and we also have the phenomenon of Saturn squaring them. But at this time period, it was Saturn and Leo squaring the nodes, right, with the North Node in Scorpio and Uranus. Now we have Saturn and Aquarius squaring the same nodes, but Uranus and the North Node are in Taurus. So massive time period for these people, just because they're already, dealing with their Saturn opposition and their Uranus opposition and their nodal opposition all together. And if you know people born this time, like that's happening for sure. But yeah, this would be, one thing, you had an interesting point about this, but one thing it makes me obviously think of is punk rock already happening at this point, but getting more together and more like taking form. Like punk was already happening, but it was getting more and more together,
established.
And punk is very Uranian in terms of being against the status quo, also being very Uranian form of like forming a group identity, and people then sort of like will conform to like people like, well, I'm a punk and this means I'm going to look this certain way or talk this certain way or play music a certain way, or there's a whole kind of code of behavior, aesthetics, identity that kind of like form around that. And it can also be part of resistance, a movement to something.
Well, and it was also considered very taboo as well, thinking about like just all dressing like all in black, or it being risque, or tattoos and piercings, and, just all those things that are very scorpionic to begin with, when we think about Uranus and Scorpio, and then that square from Saturn and Leo there. But it was an in-between year where just music in general was changing. There was, and it wasn't just punk too. It was, hard rock was kind of moving to, that's the year a lot of proto metal bands would come out. And we know that 80s had a big metal streak to it. And so the move to, more metal, and especially like the heavy British heavy metal, things along those lines kind of started then. It was also when funk started to transition to more disco, and taking more of that, dance and nightlife in a whole different direction. Of course, and the punks did not like people that, they wanted to burn all disco. So that's kind of funny that there was still that rivalry there. But yeah, so I guess the point is that we're seeing so far when we get Uranus with the North Node is that we're seeing this transitional space that is a changing of the guard in individual expression, but also communal expression, based on individuals coming together within these new forms. And that continues on because the next time.
Yeah, I like you had made another point about that I thought was good, that you sort of said with a proto, but you were saying that sort of like almost like the of the old, it was almost like it just got so big, even like the stadium.
Yes, because
that's an interesting transition time that we're kind of like the old thing's getting so blown up, but then there's something, but it's kind of over in a way, but it's still happening, but it's really big, but then there's something new coming in.
Well, because if you think about it, it's like you think about like stadium rock, and I mean stadium rock continued on through the late
Yeah.
70s, early 80s, but as it got so big and really impersonal, right? When you think about things
Mhm.
like punk or even like disco when you're at the club or whatever, this is like face to face. Like if you go to a punk show and like growing up, and I know Gray, you were in that scene too, where you go to these small shows that are really intimate in nature, and you know the people that are around you, and the band isn't on a huge stage that is like so separate from you. You're more involved with like almost a movement too. You feel unique within this smaller expression of something.
You're at somebody's house.
Exactly. You're having a house party, you're
Yeah.
like yeah, so
So I think it
it's
goes with the Taurus this year a little bit. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah. So, well, and it's interesting. The next Uranus North Node conjunction happens at a critical time of musical change too, and that's in November 12th, 1991, when it happened in Capricorn, right near when Uranus was about to conjunct Neptune too. So we have Uranus, the North Node, and Neptune and Capricorn all together. And so we were talking about grunge and Nirvana blowing up at this time, and that was a whole change of music too.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm talking right now, not too far from where Kurt lived, and here in Olympia, and Olympia had a massive scene that was already happening, right at the same time, and there was like the riot girls that were going on here too. But I guess the difference with that, Kurt was like inspired by them, but Nirvana became huge. I mean, and when this happened, I think Nevermind We Were Looking came out like September 24th, I think. So by the time this happened, that album was already sort of changing the shape of the entire music industry. And since this time, they've kind of made corporate radio rules and things where, like, I don't think things have changed so much with how the corporate control of the music industry and everything. But this is an instance where things that got really radically changed, and all these bands that had not gotten a lot of notoriety started getting signed to major labels, and all of this music was sort of exposed that had been going on for a while, but just became actually like mainstream, accessible, and popular very, very suddenly.
Yeah, it had an overnight quality to it where we were just in grunge zone from 1991 on, and it made such a huge impact on music, and especially obviously the Pacific Northwest had a big influence there when you think about all the bands that then rose to popularity, because like you said, these were underground bands. They didn't just pop up in 1991. They had been doing this since the late 80s, some even longer than that, and it was just now was the right time, and it was kind of almost the grittiest and socially just it was like punk in a sense, but a different type of punk, like almost like dirty hippie punk to to some extent, with the long hair, just unkept, like these not sure perceivably normal members of society, are being thrust in, and they kind of have that like don't care attitude, much like punk too. And so once again we're bringing this Uranian influence.
There's also a very great, innovative, and strong time of hip hop too in this time period. So
Yes.
there was a lot of just good music like that going on in this
Doing
time period.
something different.
Sort of that all connects back to interestingly, sort of all reflecting back to that 76 one, and the other thing was to this one, with like punk and hip hop coming in, like really kind of having a lot more widespread popularity and innovations happening. But this was also a time period, you're making the point where Bill Clinton is running, right? He becomes president soon after this. And that since that time, every president has had not Biden, I guess, but Clinton, Bush, Obama and Trump all have had Uranus North Node conjunctions in their chart. So there was something.
Yeah, it was
Interesting about
interesting.
that.
Yeah, how yeah. So basically in 91, we got our first, well, 92 technically, but that's when Bill Clinton was, was campaigning and coming to rise. And for some reason, there was something about the United States that needed leaders that had this Uranus North Node conjunction in their birth charts, because it happened. We talked how it happened in 61, which is the chart of Obama, but Clinton, Bush, and Donald Trump are all born in 46, which is the conjunction before that, which happened in Gemini, with the North Node and Uranus. And so we had 4 consecutive presidents in a row that had North Node and Uranus together. Which is interesting because it brings us to the last one, which was July 31st, or sorry, excuse me, March 31st of 2007, 2007.
2007, yeah.
And Gray had made a point where that was when Obama started to campaign and announced that he was, and so here
he announced around then the run. So that's interesting with the recurrence of
this North Node Uranus and then the leadership there. But the last time it happened there in 2007 was in Pisces, with Mercury right there too, which is interesting. But we were like, what was going on in music? And both of us were just like, I don't know. But we came to the idea that, well, I thought about MySpace and how MySpace was one of the first avenues where people could have a band page, or like I had a DJ page, and you could upload your music there to be heard more. And as by the end of the aughts and into the second decade of the millennia, there are where in 1991 we had all these kind of underground bands being signed to major labels. Now it's like these major labels are I don't want to say crumbling in many ways, but they don't hold the power that they used to.
They don't hold the power anymore.
Yeah, it's more of a collective space. When we think about Pisces too, and how it's in people's hands where they could put their own music out there, they could publish it themselves. But at the same time, when you think about Pisces being this massive ocean, there is also so much out there that in some respects it's hard to break across to Stell without that that driving force of the actual company, etc. And so there was a lot of just changes that happened, I think, in like music release, but being able to DIY it more successfully.
I don't know when. Makes me think of wondering when Spotify came out. I guess it would have been in this period. I mean, there's things like Spotify, which a lot of people think about sort of ruining music from the standpoint of like, not having people paid for what they're doing, but also like just opening up the access to music though really widely. And but I don't know when that actually came in, but I'm assuming it must have probably been within this Uranus North Node cycle. But I definitely think like the point you're saying about just like now it's easier now to like, you can make music and just get it out there, whether that's Bandcamp or YouTube or whatever. I mean, that and MySpace would have been going on here, and I think that would go with a big shift with that. Yeah.
Well, I think in the last point before we start, because we do have to get into our actual thing, but you made a great point, Gray, when you said we're talking about how this is around the time that Steve Jobs announced the iPhone.
Yeah,
coming
which goes
out
with the music too, right? Everyone now is just like on your phone.
Exactly. It combined the iPod basically with your phone.
Right.
And other things like GPS, this is, which I had the first iPhone, and that GPS saved me on a very long ride where I would have been lost in the fog, which is very Pisces, right? Had I not had that GPS. But there's something to be said about the North Node meeting Uranus at the same time Mercury did, and how the signature of that conjunction actually was melded in with Mercury there as well. So that's interesting.
Yeah. So definitely. So tradition back to the present.
Back to the present.
I think when we're talking about this early 2022, and now the North Node is in Taurus, it's going to be basically intensifying. We can mention this later, but we're talking really like once we get to July and then going into August, that's when it's like full on
We're gonna, yeah,
happening.
yeah.
But it's sort of they're getting up until that point, they're getting closer and closer and closer. So once the nodes switch, there's something already building with it.
Yeah, because it's present together. I guess what I'll say real quick too, just with Uranus North Node conjunct in Taurus, they seem to meet at exactly 167 years in time. So the last time we had Uranus North Node conjunct in actual sign of Taurus was in March 16th, 1855. Which was interesting because that's actually when Jupiter and Neptune were in Pisces again, too.
I was going to say, I think it's 1856 that the last Jupiter Neptune conjunction
happened. Yeah, in Pisces. Yeah. So that was an interesting, and I was like looking back to 1855, I'm like, what's going on? And actually on the day before this conjunction happened, Louisiana made the first board of health, because they were first board of health in relation to quarantine, because they were dealing with yellow fever epidemic that was taking over basically in this year. And then in 1856 too, when there was a ship from the West Indies that came into Virginia that had they just brought it with them. And yeah, so this was a time when they were actually dealing with a massive epidemic, and working through that and needing order in order to deal with quarantines and know who could go where and what limits were, and how to structure that in a way to help people and not spread it. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting overlay.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then before that, July 1687, and then February 1520. So if you want to go back and get in there. Oh, actually 1687 was interesting, Gray, because that the same month that the Uranus North Node conjunction happened in 1687, it was when Sir Isaac Newton published Principia, which was his work on the laws of motion and universal gravitation.
Oh, wow.
Which is like a crucial piece of science in our development, which was actually founded and derived from Kepler's laws of planetary motion. So basically this a classic of like mechanical science was published the very month that the North Node met in Taurus with Uranus in 1687. So that was a little bit fascinating to me.
Yeah, it makes me think just of gravity, the gravity of this alignment.
Right. It's very interesting. All right. So that it's hopefully you're still with us. We're so now we're going to pull it back and actually do a little time related rather than hopping all over the place in space and time and going on musical tangents, but hopefully you enjoyed that. But so we're going to start with looking at the Capricorn ingress here at the end of 2021, because with each seasonal ingress, it gives us an overlay of just energies for the 3 months that follow it, or at least the 3 astrological months when we think of Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces seasons. And so let me see here. Let me stop my share and get to our other screen. We're a Capricorn. Where are you?
Yeah. So, as far as the ingress, this speaks to the Venus retrograde. So Venus has gestation retrograde. She's conjoining Pluto. The moon is in Cancer, barely separating, but separating from it. So there's something interesting all around the world, no matter where that's showing up, how much the people are, because the moon tends to represent the people. We're all kind of coming from this Venus-Pluto conjunction. If you count the quincunx, the moon is applying to Jupiter by a quincunx very closely, but the next very Ptolemaic aspect, I believe, is an out of sign trine to Mars. Mars is in Sag near the South Node. And what you can also see in that chart is, except for the moon, all the planets are within the nodes. So I think we talked about this last year, the Kala Serpa thing, like the time serpent, when
Yeah.
all the planets are contained by the nodes. We're going to go through that same thing again.
Interesting.
Until I think it's April 23rd.
Which is right after the Saturn squares the nodes, basically.
Yeah. So every month there'll be a period where the moon gets outside of it. And if we count Ceres as a dwarf planet, she, as we kind of talked about earlier, she's already kind of near the north node. So Ceres will get outside of it, but all the major planets will be inside the nodes and kind of contained. And so it's interesting how this has been showing up as we're going through these pandemic situations, and we're kind of in another period now where it seems like things are starting to accelerate again, and some places are locking down a little bit more again, and there's again sort of collective hysteria and collective denial and collective, just all over the place, right? And everybody's stirred up again. And like that happens every single time you have this configuration, but it's been strangely showing up with this pandemic that way.
Yeah.
Well, but that's anyway. But
it's interesting one of the things we're seeing in the news a lot here in the United States is they're trying to overturn Roe versus Wade, which is definitely a Venus-Pluto sort of matter, especially when you get the government involved in Capricorn there. But what's really significant to think about within the, because it's this chart essentially that the Capricorn ingress at the solstice is going to be an overlay of 3 months time. And on February 20th in 2022, at least here in the US, which I know a lot of people listen here are in the US, we're going to have our first Pluto return pass. So to have the solstice chart have that Moon, Venus, Pluto action, when we're headed towards the first Pluto return here in the United States, which is a big, also, at least for US, politics and situations and citizens, et cetera. It's a big year for us. This is activated there. And so, here in the 11th house, at least set for Washington, by whole sign, it gets a little, well, I guess it's kind of still in there by Placidus. It gets kind of close. But
yeah, Venus is, it depends a little bit how you work with cusps. Venus in the Placidus chart, if you use the 5 degree, she's within about 3 degrees of the 12th house. So she's kind of right at that 12th house.
Yeah.
Cusp, which is kind of fitting in a lot of ways.
It is. Actually.
And the moon's like kind of heading into the 6th house, about to cross the 6th house cusp.
Yeah.
So that actually, and also in Placidus, which I think is fitting, Mars is actually in the 9th house with the South node. And even in a whole sign though, Mars would be ruling the whole sign 9th house. So I think that shows, I'm just thinking Supreme Court as 9th house, I think you would say. I think the court is usually the 9th house.
Yeah.
And so that just shows the fight and tumult and the discord, the Mars element coming from that place. And that's certainly going to be something people are stirred up by. But I think for everybody, this Venus retrograde time period, there typically is often a lot of unrest and in society, and often protests start happening, and in personal lives there's often things that we want to change, and especially in Capricorn, renegotiating boundaries within relationships and form, all that kind of thing would be even up more so than normal. And with Pluto being involved, it's very deep material, really old relational patterns, the deepest, most core relational patterns at the root of, your security and attachments, that all that kind of stuff that really gets in there with your relationship dynamics with others really coming to the surface. But then in the United States, like you're saying, this is also, this quarter of the year is taking us into the first Pluto return. in the United States since July 4th, 1776, which means basically Pluto's on track to get back to where it was on that, legendary day of July 4th, 1776. I think it's February 10th is, I believe, the first day. And there's going to be 3 this year. I know I have the date written down.
Yeah, I think it's
February 10th. No, I'm sorry, February 20th. February 20th, then July 10th, and then I think December 28th. So there'll be 3. We'll kind of start the year with a coming. We're going to end the year with the Pluto return, and there'll be one kind of right in the middle in the summer here. So that also speaks to just, for those in the United States, all this, so we're in our personal lives, there's all this material that's going to be coming up to work with and process and transmute and, bring into new forms in relationship. I think it goes well with the Scorpio South Node, Taurus North Node that Venus will be ruling. But in the United States, just culturally, all the buried material, all the stuff people don't want to look at, which has already been, honestly, it's already been stirred up so much in recent years as we've been approaching this.
Well,
that's just going to be,
that could be part of the retrograde position of Venus. It's like we're not revisiting, we're not introducing. It's like, what have we yet to do?
Yeah, it's not really introducing anything new.
Yeah, it's and it can be a lot of internalized too, like with Venus being the position that she's in, and not being, because the last time Venus went retrograde was in Gemini, which is a lot more outspoken, and verbally saying what she thinks and how she feels, and versus Capricorn, and which is a Saturn ruled sign, which can be more distant or tucked inward, or like processing, like or having a hard time actually connecting with that through either limitation or just kind of that Saturnian walled off kind of energy. And the fact that there's tension too in this chart, because Saturn and Uranus are about to meet for the last time, and that Uranus is ruled by Venus, so, and Venus and Pluto are looking to Saturn, so it really all comes back to this Saturn in Aquarius, just by rulership is concerned. But it's an interesting ping pong energy, with Mars all over there and Sagittarius just getting all Jupiter-fied on the South Node. It seems kind of loud there, but not really.
And you have a Capricorn Moon, right?
Yeah, I do.
So you know that, I mean, sometimes the way stuff gets framed in astrology, the earth signs don't get all the fascinating, complexity they actually hold. So there's actually, lots of complexity to Capricorn, as well as Taurus, where the North Node is going. And it's sort of like, the richness of the earth and how much is, buried under the surface. And so there's really a lot of deep material that can come out of this. But, earth signs being more internal, it's like you really got to go down, right? I mean, to get to that, you got to dig deep, right, and go down and get under the surface. And when we think about even just like the earth and what is the earth and the land, it's the home of all the ancestors, all this collective material we have, right, that's just around us all the time and present with us. So I think it just really speaks to that, and to work with that, you have to take your time.
Yes.
And then with Capricorn being it glorifies Saturn and Mars. It's the home of Saturn. It's where Mars is exalted. So what are they good at? They're good at creating boundaries and containers and being protective, and keeping certain things out, letting certain things in. So I think there's a containment that can be really powerful here to open up the more complex, wildness and exploration of Capricorn. But the shadow would be, right, which we'll probably be seeing a lot, is people instead becoming over controlling and fearful, and that can flip to a negative side, you know what I mean, of just being overly materialistic, and I have to, this is mine, that's yours, and that kind of thing.
Well, yeah. And I mean, when that's the thing too, I feel like when we're looking at the contention between Saturn and Uranus, and Saturn actually being that fear component that can be behind the shadow side of Capricorn, or just Saturn in general, and Uranus being able to, I don't know, kind of like, because I think of Uranus, not all the time, but a lot of times it can be very risk energy, or it gets weighed down and it has to liberate itself some way. And in fear can be very burdensome. And being able to kind of crack that open in some way, and be willing to kind of trust and take a risk when we might not normally be able to do so. Because that's another thing with Taurus and Scorpio access is there's a real trust component that happens in those signs, or that seems to be an issue with planets in that sign. And so kind of like, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, is like, being in the flow of life and like trusting the process, and where fear and severity and conflict or competition tend to get in the way of something that's just trying to flow. And flow, it is not always easy. A lot of times, flow comes through eruptions, like volcanic, and then the flow of the lava, and it continues down. And so being able to kind of work and be flexible within the flow of life, which can be sometimes disruptive, especially internally, without letting fear or that limited scope that I was talking about earlier, like the limited vision, get in the way of where life is trying to move you to, especially when we're in all this change. I guess if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And so all this stuff with Capricorn and the Pluto, places in the past where you've been betrayed, places where you haven't been able to trust your issues. This stuff can all be being brought to the surface, but it's going to be about how do you actually hold that, how can you find the people that can, ally with you and companion, I'm not the wrong word for that, but relate to you with that material, and talk about it and work with it yourself and do your own inner explorations of it. And so you're able to still open up, it's stuff like opening up to be understood. And where Venus ends up going, I believe the same day she stations retrograde, Chiron actually stations direct in Aries.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so she'll be going back over the course of her retrograde to end up squaring Chiron and Aries. And there's something the astrologer Brian Clark said in this relationship astrology class I was taking, that he was teaching, that I really like about Chiron. And Brian Clark was saying something to the effect that, somebody was asking about like a composite Chiron, and is this composite Chiron, is this how we heal this wound, the Chiron thing in our charts? And he was saying that, well, Chiron doesn't actually want to heal. I mean, Chiron's going to keep it broken, but it's like being understanding how it's broken. And I think that really is something about this Venus retrograde, because of it starting with Pluto. She's going to go back, interact with Chiron. We really have this opportunity when you're talking about that lack of trust that can come up with all, and Taurus Scorpio nodes too would speak to that.
Yeah.
But we can work on understanding where these things come from, and hopefully doing that in a relationship can be ways to learn to open and trust and have more of an understanding of where that's coming from, to create more of the relationships we want going forward.
Yeah, I like that, especially with the Chiron component, because it doesn't mean you're gonna fully heal it. It's just you learn to understand it and work with it. And I feel like we're at a different level of understanding too, because the nice thing about the ingress chart is that Mercury is trining Uranus too. So it's almost like they're like Mercury's like, okay, well, I'm willing, I want to look at things in a different perspective. Like I'm willing to look for the breakthrough or accept the breakthrough in some way. Or test myself in being able to communicate in ways that I have yet to, or in topics that are very, fixed, like the Taurus zone there. And so I think that bodes well a little bit for just being able to err on some of that Uranian side that still comes back to, it all comes back to the Saturn Uranus square in this chart, really. But I do like Mercury.
Yeah, I mean, the Saturn, right. That's a good point. We actually, for some reason, haven't been mentioning that, but the last exact Saturn Uranus square is basically happening right here. So we've been talking about the fact that the Saturn Uranus square is basically happening all of next year, but we just don't get an exact to the degree and the minute. I mean, they get to the same degree, I believe, just not the same degree and the minute. And we get the last to the degree and the 2 minute to the minute, right after this solstice chart. So this solstice chart is like kind of maximum, suspended tension of like, of Saturn. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's the third and final exact square just about to happen. Like when we have this solstice ingress chart. So it's really loaded in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll continue to feel, I mean, we're going to continue to feel it through 2022, but we're going to feel it in these first 3 months, of the changeover into the year, because we're under this ingress chart basically.
Yeah, and you can look back, just speaking to that, trying to remember now, the dates are escaping me, even though I've looked at and repeated those dates so many times in my life this past year. But the we've had I think it was in February and June, if I'm remembering correctly, of this past year. Just don't remember the exact days. And but we've had this Uranus Saturn square theme the entire year, and so something's been building through all these changes. It's not like this third and final one, everything's just resolved and it's all over, but there's probably just a lot more understanding that can be gained and engaged with at this point, with how are you been working with that square through the entire year? Because really all of 2021 has been that square happen. When we entered 2021, it was already building, getting ready to happen. And then it's already happened twice exactly. And like we're saying, it's actually going to keep the influence spans all of next year. But this being, we entering the solstice season with the final exact one is bringing sort of like some sort of important events are happening around this, related to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Just to kind of sort through and understand relating to how your life has been changed. Because most people's lives have been changed in just, really drastic ways by this transit.
Yeah, I definitely, I feel that. Yeah. So look back to mid-February and then mid-June. And then of course here in December 23rd, by the time this airs, you'll be feeling it. But then, like we said, it picks up through 2022, and then we're going to have nodal interaction with those 2 planets that are going to carry the story forward even more. But a lot of the tension, I think, and the kind of like plot twists and bigger decisions made or entertained, or things thrown at us, which Uranus loves to do. Those have been happening. So, I mean, take stock of 2021, especially in this last week of December, because you're probably going to see that wheel of your life and how it has shifted in whatever areas you have Aquarius and Taurus particularly, but really all the fixed signs, because they've all kind of interacted with the wheel. And are going to continue, because obviously we have the nodal action coming. So that being said, Gray, let's move on to
we should go into January, I think.
January.
Get going with the year's transits.
Get going already.
So we go into January, and we get the new moon in Capricorn right away. Mercury goes into Aquarius. So that thing happens where, Mercury's been in Capricorn, it goes into Aquarius, getting ready to go retrograde. but we get a new moon in Capricorn trining Uranus, which is an interesting way just to kind of start the year.
Yeah, I know it is.
Yeah, which will sort of be a nice way to kind of get in with that. But the new moon's obviously also then applying towards the Venus retrograde and the Pluto. So this new moon's also really intersecting with that. And it's about within a week or so, on January 8th is when we get the Venus conjunction with the sun. This new moon looks like it's right around the time where Venus is probably still visible for people in a lot of locations, but she's she's already under the beams by the classical 15-degree marker, and she's getting ready to start going, combust and get within like 8 degrees of the sun. She's like 10 degrees here. But it's within a week. This is right when we're kind of going into that like Venus in the underworld, which doesn't take very long actually in the retrograde phase. She's not there too long because she's going backwards and the sun's going forward. So they just kind of pass each other. But this January 8th one is when she's actually in the heart of the sun, being reanimated, being regenerated. And so there's hopefully here a nice time to maybe sink into more of whatever the changes are that's been going on for you with the Venus retrograde.
Yeah, I feel like her meeting the sun will give us a nice little hit of what we've already been going through, or maybe so just, sun always brings awareness, and her sitting in, the king's court there after going through all the Pluto, right? Like going through all the dark and all the, more trying aspects that Pluto can bring up, and then seeing the light to some extent. For whatever, even if that is just understanding something or what have you, it seems to be a defining moment of her journey as she gets rebirth there.
Yeah, and if you just go like a week or so forward, or a few days forward, Mercury's then, you can see, getting closer and closer to Saturn on this chart. But instead of Mercury just kind of going over Saturn, Mercury's actually slowing down here, and then stations retrograde on the 14th, almost to Saturn, but not quite, but pretty closely squaring Uranus. So it's sort of like Mercury just goes up to connect to that Saturn Uranus square. So we're getting kind of tapped into that energy with it, but then, he's going to then head back to Pluto and that Capricorn that we were talking about that earlier, but that happens right here.
Yeah, it seems like, I feel like Mercury is like, it's like almost ready to meet Saturn. It's almost ready to make a decision, maybe. I think of like Saturn being as decisive energy too, but not quite yet. There are some things that need to be gone over. We got to get down to the nitty gritty of Pluto once more. Maybe there's just some introductory of Uranus, like, because you got to think too, what's happening is when Mercury retrogrades on the 14th, basically from the 14th to the 18th, we have Mercury retrograde. We have a Plutonian full moon, and we have Uranus stationing at the same time. So basically Mercury is going retrograde at the same time Uranus is stationing to go direct. So it's almost like they're trading messages almost within that. And then the moon comes around and is like, surprise, I want to give you more of that Pluto. What, do you want to engage with that Pluto some more, on January 17th there. So
so you're right around then, right after Mercury's retrograde, like January 18th or so period, 17th, I guess. 18th, 17th, 18th, there's a full moon
basically that
opposite Pluto again, right? You're saying, but then Uranus is stationing then. And those Uranus stations are often pretty dramatic. And I think we definitely can expect this one to be, since we're still in that Saturn Uranus square time period and Mercury's squaring it, and
and that's
a full moon's happening at the same time.
I know, right? It's like, what's not going on? And then by, the true node, we have the nodes moving into Taurus and Scorpio on the 18th too. So there is a lot of
this whole period is very this really makes me think of like the old associations of Capricorn and Aquarius with Enki and those like creator, subterranean water deities of like Babylonia. And speaking of which is kind of interesting, the star Deneb Getty, which is actually the tail of the Seagoat constellation of Capricorn, Jupiter has been hanging out a lot with recently. It's around 23 Aquarius. But later in this year, interestingly, Saturn will be there, where, and visually in the sky, we'll probably actually see Saturn up around the tail of the Seagoat. But that creator, Enki's sort of in that subterranean, there's that idea of a Capricorn Aquarius in that ancient culture. It's like the oceanic expanse of the sky, right? And there's this, sort of this period that seems very, even though we think about Capricorn often, some people will think of it as being very structured and orderly. There's actually a lot of Capricorn process working with disorder and chaos and being able to reshape something and have a new order and reordering, emerging. And I think that's just sort of this whole period. We have like the Mercury retrograde going on, the Venus retrograde going on. We get Uranus stationing direct, basically trining Venus retrograde. There's just a lot of deep shifting happening here during this whole period to just be kind of working with.
And that makes sense for this time of year anyways, because we, having the Capricorn solstice, and then, typically we have a full moon in Cancer, and these are two pivot signs, but extreme pivots because they're solstice signs. So we kind of always have that, restructuring and, I love that, the finding the order within the chaos, or like what's changed so that we can start fresh. And that's kind of the new year jam anyways, right? We're trying to like put our new form on what the year will look like, but having those two planets retrograde, Mercury and Venus, and then Uranus stationing direct to adding a surprise component there. I feel like there's extra that is in disarray, or pieces that are just floating about that could use that restructuring. And then to have it happen with Pluto involved. So however it gets restructured is probably going to be significantly different, or demand bigger, decent changes of us, whether that is in the external form or just internally, where, something is transforming into a new form.
This time period, Pluto just keeps coming up.
Just keeps coming at us.
We get sun's with Pluto at this full moon. And then as we go into the Aquarius season of, sun going into Aquarius, sort of what I was just speaking to, and you were just talking about, is all these deep changes happening and shifting. It seems like this, to me, the overarching theme of this is like, there ends up being sort of like this like thrusting of like something starts like coming out here. Like there's lots of changes, but we're going to start getting a sense of how to start bringing some things into form. And there's things ready to start, change. Literally changing directions. Venus stations direct on January 29th. Just around the same time that Mercury is actually with retrograde and with Pluto. Right before that, soon after the sun goes into Aquarius, Mars goes into Capricorn. And so I think it's January 24th, the next day of what you have here. And so when this happens, you're on January 24th, January 25th, Mars goes into Capricorn. And now we have Mars in Capricorn. We have Venus retrograde in Capricorn, about to station direct. We have Pluto in Capricorn, and then Mercury comes back into Capricorn. Like, I think the next day maybe, or on this day, later on the same day that you're on here. Yeah.
We do want to save the Mercury Cazimi.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's where I started.
Yeah.
Because it's the second that we get it, and you already alluded to this earlier in our dialogue about how the first Sun Mercury inferior Cazimi happens at the beginning of Aquarius, there, right near our Jupiter Saturn conjunction, right near where Mars and Saturn made a conjunction, right near where Venus and Mars will eventually make a conjunction
Yeah.
in March. So this is a hot spot of the zodiac in the first degrees of Aquarius. And so when we're talking about that forward vision and having gone through so much change, and then Mercury comes along to seed with the sun on the 23rd of January, to have that moment there, it feels very potent to then go on to do what you were just saying, where Mars and Mercury move into Capricorn from the 24th to the 25th. Venus stations direct on the 29th. And yeah, so it seems like this is one of those kind of changing of the guard moments from everything that just happened.
Definitely. Yeah. That's great. Yep. So that is an important data to be paying attention, like you just said. But then, yeah, once we get, I guess it's like a week later, Venus stations direct on the 29th. And then right as she's stationing direct, we get the new moon in Aquarius. And I think that's the 31st.
Yeah, the 31st.
So this is kind of where I feel like, yeah, like that's sort of like there's something like what's wanting to start coming out of this, because Mercury, it's a few more days before Mercury stations direct, but Mercury is already starting to station. Mercury's already slowing down and getting ready to go officially direct. Venus has already gone direct, and this new moon is also squaring Uranus and pretty much conjoining Saturn. Yeah. So this is really, and Mars is already in Capricorn, getting a little closer to Venus. The other thing about this period is we go through this long period of Venus being in between, Mars and Saturn, and being and so that's sort of enclosed basically, which is a few ways I think to look at that. You could be the half empty side, I guess, would be like, oh, Venus is in such a rough. This is a rough gig for Venus.
He's cornered.
But I don't know. I mean, Venus is going to make that. I don't know. You could also say, like, how is Venus going to be helping Mars and Saturn come together? Because we'll see this goes on for a while, where Mars and Saturn and Venus within a sign of each other. But yeah, I feel like this is like a period where stuff is really ready to change, and hopefully at this point there's more of a sense of whatever you've been going through with the internal processing and change. There's more of a sense of what you want to be doing here, and could be an opportunity to get a lot more activated and have some forward movement happening.
Yeah, I agree. Because we already know when we talked about the Capricorn solstice chart and the Saturn and Uranus almost making their square and encompassing a 3-month period. Well, this is the new moon that basically starts the cycle that is going to connect with these planets directly, and what that shift has been. And then having just that pile up in Capricorn too, that adds a lot of practicality to where that goes next, right? Because we have all the personal planets there. We got Pluto, so there, even though it's a Uranian new moon, there's still a lot of Capricorn action that is ready to activate on the material plane, even though Mercury's still retrograde at this point, it's about to turn direct. So it's already it's already got its mission to some extent. So yeah, it has that forward reaching vision part of it, but it also has the planets that are willing to do the work, to me, of what actually take action and what needs to be done, especially with Mars now in Capricorn.
And speaking to that, Mars and Capricorn exalted, taking action, able to get stuff done. It's moving into you can see it on this chart, it's going into a sextile with Jupiter and Pisces and a trine with Uranus and Taurus. Yeah. So there is something there, and that's all kind of forming as Mercury's going direct, basically.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then Mercury stations on February 3rd, right as Gray said, with Mars activating Jupiter and Uranus in flowing
Mhm.
formation.
Yeah.
So that seems nice to kind of get a leg up on this new moon to some extent. And but that then if we kind of arrive at our full moon, that's what I have next on the 15th
Sure.
and the
Yeah.
16th
Hmm.
of February, where we have a nodal activation basically taking place, where I think we're gonna get a solid hit of what of what Taurus and Scorpio are saying to us, because the luminaries are going to be forming a grand cross with the nodes
Yeah.
in the in between eclipse season, as we can know it, and there's always big turning points. But we also have Venus conjuncting Mars in Capricorn, which this is going to be the second conjunction of her three conjunction tour that
Mhm.
started back in August of 2021. And at the same time, we actually have Jupiter making a sextile to Uranus too, in a bigger theme that is taking place. And so this feels significant, Gray, to me.
Yeah. There was the previous, I have in my mind July 13th, but I might be wrong about that. But it was Venus and Mars in Leo. Um, but as we actually talked about last year, we knew that even though they formed a conjunction last summer in the northern hemisphere, they were going to end up, because of her going retrograde, they're going to come back two more times. So this is the second one. It may or may not relate to some relationship developments. It would make sense that it would, though, that were going on back last July, or last summer. And now we've gone through a whole Venus retrograde, a lot of kind of deeper material coming up, and now there's something else, that they're coming together again. But what's so fascinating is because they come together right here, but because Venus is starting to pick up speed, she really just starts following Mars, so they never
Yeah.
really get far apart. And they come back together, basically as soon as they go into Aquarius on March 3rd. So they do come together here in the middle of February, but then there's one more on March 3rd where they come together in Aquarius. But from this conjunction to that conjunction, yeah, they're going all the way across Capricorn. They're going to go across Pluto again. So when she comes back to Pluto, Venus comes back to Pluto after this whole retrograde, Mars is there too, with Venus, and then so they're going to go across Pluto together. So it's really a super, like, going even deeper into that Pluto material.
Well, Gray, the image that came into mind with me, and maybe I'm thinking about relationally too, is that essentially Venus and Mars are holding hands, right? And they're holding hands to cross Pluto. And so there's, to some extent that could be reinforcement of like the two planets working together at some time, or perhaps once Pluto, happens and then it starts to break away. Like it could go either way. But there's something about almost like, I guess, Venus and Mars, like holding hands and crossing a threshold together. And this could be the romantic in me. Like I'm water signs. But Pluto is always, it's going to take us where it's going to take us. But
well, I would say in some cases, yeah, in some cases, some relationships that have really been processing stuff, there could be this much deeper level of intimacy, commitment that comes out of this process. But it could certainly go all the way, other directions.
Exactly.
Yeah, it could go other directions.
Exactly.
For sure.
So
that would be one. That's like, to me, the higher level of, or not higher, but like the more positive, deeper meaning of Pluto relating to all this would be like that. Yeah, you've really kind of purified and brought up a lot of stuff to the surface, and there's understanding been developed, and and as a result, there's a deeper bond, there's deeper trust, there's deeper commitment, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because at the end of the day too, we have a cardinal earth sign taking place here. So something's starting, something is beginning in its form, and in literal material ways too. We think about relationships and jobs and financial agreements and contracts and the home. I speak for myself. Like, I'm trying to buy a home with my partner right now basically, and I think about like Capricorn energy and Taurus and all that type of stuff, and that search and all that. So we'll see. Another thing
creatively, this could hopefully be a good time too, and again, like, just continuing. I mean, that's what this whole time, like, if you've been working with it, not get whatever upsetting or difficult things happen related to Venus retrograde or all these Capricorn things that we were talking about, taking your time with it, just kind of realizing this is like a long period of time, like that they still haven't even, it's going to take them until March to get back to basically where Pluto is.
It makes
so like there's something that if you take it by this point though, there's a real that deep, like that deep, more authentic, essential quality, core kind of desires of Pluto you could really be making a lot more contact with it, and then really starting to work with it more actively engaged and everything.
Yeah. And so I guess during this whole time period that we're talking about, and even the time period that we're in as we're recording this, and having all these Pluto activations and Venus and Mars involved, it's like, if something means something to you, if something is valuable to you, especially in the long run, take your time with it, because it's going to go through some things. And as they say, the old adage, the best things in life, no, that aren't free. No, that's not the one, but good things take time. Right. I guess is what I'm trying to say here. Yep. So, don't give up on it, and don't try to take easy way out or let Mars, and especially in Sagittarius on the South Node, derail you, but that's a whole nother thing. But
I think we should move for time, maybe move into Pisces.
Yes, let's go into Pisces
time. So this is a Pluto return. Like, we go into Pisces in the United States. If you want to remember it, just like Sun goes into Pisces, Pluto returns happening. It's like basically, I think the exact one's like 2 days later.
Yeah. So February 20th here, we have the Sibley chart up. You can see,
cool.
We can see Pluto, and Pluto they're on top of each other. So this is that pass taking place.
And Neptune. So it's also the Neptune opposition is pretty much exactly.
Oh, that is right. Yes, that is.
We've already been having that. That's been going on. Not as many people have talked about it in astrology for some reason, but
speaks to Neptune.
Yeah,
we'll just throw that over.
I feel like that's pretty obvious that's been going on.
No.
But both of those things happening pretty much simultaneously is pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So just an FYI note, paying attention to U.S. action, February 20th, and obviously
sort of like
weeks
the deep
leading up.
Yeah, the deep underbelly of the American dream and all the toxic.
Well, probably financially
toxic material
related.
That's part of that coming out. Yeah.
Financially related stuff is going to be a big thing here. I have a feeling. So just FYI there, but what we do have from March 2nd through I think what I have next is March 2nd for the Pisces new moon.
Yeah, sure. We can go to that.
March 2nd through the 6th, we basically have Mercury's going to
Pisces new moon is really nice, I think, actually.
And it's interesting too, because I feel like there's like almost like this transcendent resolve to it, because we have Mercury making its finally making the conjunction with Saturn, right? It almost made it to the with the retrograde in mid-January, but now it's finally speaking with Saturn. And it's in it's approaching the square with the nodes after that. We have the new moon conjunct Jupiter in Pisces with Venus. This is our Venus, Mars, Pluto party all together.
Venus, Mars, Pluto all together. And then the new moon sextile Uranus.
Yes. And then right after that, basically, is when in the days after that is when Venus and Mars move into Aquarius to conjunct on the 6th. So there is this like first couple days after this new moon in Pisces that is it's got a lot of planetary action to it. Not to mention the sun conjunct Jupiter too, you know.
And the Jupiter Neptune's been coming in. I mean, Jupiter Neptune will already be in effect before this, but this new moon that's conjoining Jupiter, which I'm very happy about.
Are you happy about it? I feel good about it too. I've actually been looking forward to this new moon for quite some time now in my mind. I feel like it's something. Maybe it's because it's a 5th house new moon for me, but you know, like
yeah. I mean, I think I like it. I like it. I'm also excited about the Jupiter Neptune conjunction, and so because you know we can see now they're getting within about 8 degrees of each other, and then this new moon sort of bringing them together. The moon will bring them together, passing over both of them.
Yeah.
Right after this.
Yeah.
You're probably getting a sense of what this is about for you, but this is a very deep and impactful alignment and transit. Jupiter and Neptune, it's in Pisces, so it's in the sign of Jupiter. There are many astrologers around the world that do use Neptune as a ruler of Pisces, and I think most people that are just not total Neptune skeptics at least can agree that there's a resonance between Neptune and Pisces. So they're both in it's in an environment that's very welcoming to Jupiter and Neptune. Jupiter and Neptune can both really do their thing to maximum extremity in Pisces. The cycle is very visionary, and even though we think about Jupiter and Neptune being very boundless, especially in Pisces, the cycle is like very orderly. It happens roughly every 13 years, not exactly every 13 years, but it's a cycle that actually goes from one sign to another, with every once in a while repeating a sign. It's one of the only cycles that actually does that. So we had one in 2009. There were a few that year in Aquarius. Before that, it was 1997 Capricorn. Before that, it was 1984 Capricorn. The 84 is like beginning of Capricorn, and 97 was kind of the end of Capricorn. So we had a repeat. And then before that was 1971 in Sagittarius. So because of that Capricorn repeat, we've had 3 of these in a row, 1984, 97, 2009, that have all been in Saturn ruled signs.
Oh, yeah.
And this will be the first time that we've had one in a Jupiter ruled sign since 1971. And when these outer planet alignments are always really important, but when one of them happens, when one of the planets involved is actually a traditional planet ruling a sign, and it's actually happening in that sign, I feel like they're even more powerful. That was, one reason a lot of people were really knowing that Saturn Jupiter conjunction in Aquarius was going to be such a big deal, because Saturn was in its own sign. Yeah. Just like the Saturn Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, we kind of knew that was going to be a big deal because Saturn's in its own sign. And this is very different from Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn. This is Jupiter, Pisces, Jupiter, Neptune, and Pisces. So it's really, complete boundless inner imaginative exploration and vision. For a lot of the transit, as you're kind of showing, once you get later in the April, Venus will be actually in her exaltation of Pisces with them even. Yeah, we're about to get into the Pisces party. Yeah, there's something very creative that can come in here. Andre Barbeau has, he's a very well-known French astrologer. I think I might have notes here of some of his quotes. He's really well known as somebody long time, but just to give him some street cred if you don't know about Andre Barbeau. He basically predicted the 2020 pandemic a long time ago. And his analysis of the Jupiter-Neptune cycle is, he uses terms like unified collective global power. He also collective liberal order, collective movements that have liberal democratic tendencies that favor universal moral values. So for example, when women got the right to vote in the United States of America, finally, there's Jupiter-Neptune. When world governments, in response to the world wars, whether you like the United Nations or not, the intent of that was to create, these unified world bodies to try to like actually work with all the countries and prevent another world war. So the League of Nations, which didn't work out though, the League of Nations connected to World War I, Jupiter, Neptune. When the United Nations comes in, in response to World War II, it's Jupiter, Neptune. The actual peace symbol was invented, that we use as a peace symbol, was invented, Jupiter, Neptune.
Interesting.
The Cuban Revolution, Jupiter, Neptune. The Zapatista Revolution, Jupiter, Neptune. There's been lots of in the United States. There's been lots of labor union organizing and strikes happening. I think Major League Baseball just is going into a strike. Perhaps I think I saw something about that. Strikes, labor organization.
Starbucks, I think, I think Starbucks. I just read something today about them. Is it Starbucks
That is
or
a
Amazon?
Jupiter, that has been a very consistent Jupiter-Neptune alignment. Roosevelt and a New Deal, Jupiter-Neptune. Obama creating healthcare finally in the United States, Jupiter-Neptune. So so that's kind of on a mass collective level, but at personal levels, it's the last Jupiter Neptune, the work of Carl Jung was finally published on the Red Book, and that whole personal underworld odyssey that's collected in the Red Book and all that meaning can then be associated with Jupiter Neptune in terms of that actually seeing the light of day. And within the past Jupiter Neptune cycle, the transformative quality of how Jung's work has been understood. And in more recent years, that's been paired with understanding more his astrology and how much his astrological understanding was embedded in the Red Book. So it's pretty, and I think a lot more people in the world now who are interested in that sort of thing. And that sort of personal odyssey that you can go through and use art and and such to kind of like to work with it. I think that's just a great way. That's just something that could be going on with this for everybody really. And so in this time of great mystery, of transition, this is just a huge imaginative visionary potential coming in here to try to just see what you can get out of it and work with creatively.
Yeah, there's definitely a creative component to this conjunction. I mean, obviously it's in Pisces too, so that adds to it as well. But just in general, there's a creative element. There's a spiritually related element. When we think about the last time Jupiter and Neptune met in Pisces in the mid 1856, right? When we talk about like the close proximity to the Uranus North Node. There was a spiritualism movement going on. There was a lot of talk about, because to add to what you were saying with like kind of these public programs or labor movements, there is like a help to the underdog, or help to people that are in positions that need either charity or need some sort of larger voice to help them rise into a more like, I don't know, I think, what am I trying to say? During the mid 1800s there, with that conjunction, there was, even within the spiritualism movement, there was a lot of women that stepped up and kind of took the lead in the spiritualism. And they actually, it was led more by women, and they spoke to rights for people of color and, people that were considered, less than in society. And so there's always seems to be sort of this helping out of people that that are in quote unquote lower positions that shouldn't necessarily be, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. And hopefully some further developments with maybe therapeutic modalities and ways to work. So this is also coming in, right? The Jupiter-Neptune conjunction is basically trining the South Node in Scorpio, and it's sextile the North Node in Taurus. So whatever this we can see with that, which one way is I'm thinking of is like what I was saying so earlier, how we work with all this collective grief and stuff, and bring that into how do we work on the Taurus North End, creatively and compassionately, and bring something and new things into form that are going to help people out. We can also think about the supply chains, people talking about, right, and economic crises and different things and housing and all that. But hopefully there's something being in Pisces too. There's some new senses of vision of how to intersect with all that, and visions of new structures to create and everything, and reorganize. And then creatively, it's just really powerful. The last time there was one in 1856, I'll just share one thing quickly. There was this guy, William Henry Perkin, who was actually trying to synthesize quinine. I don't know how to pronounce it, but for the treatment of malaria, and he accidentally discovered this purple dye, which is now called mauveine, and it basically led into it became the first time you could actually just create a purple dye and actually dye colored clothing purple, and it created this whole fashion trend wave of things being dyed purple, and especially purple you could only ever dye things purple in ancient times with sea snails. It's a color of royalty.
Yeah, it was only the very few people could have purple dye.
So I think purple, if you look up mauveine, there's really neat images of some of the old clothes and fashion with it, but I almost think that's the color, just because that came into being. Well, yeah, because also when did Purple Rain come out? It was Jupiter-Neptune.
Neptune gets your purple is my
Purple Rain
color.
Thriller. I mean, Michael Jackson's a Jupiter-Neptune person, but Purple Rain. Much later, we had the
It's if that's not Jupiter Neptune conjunction in Pisces, Purple Rain. Come on,
that was a Jupiter Neptune time, and he came out with that.
Why does that not surprise me? But I love that.
Because the whole fashion that all came out of that. Which there's also this is all part of the Industrial Revolution and everything too. But there's something about that, I think, and just it also enabled, though, you can think of all the bad things about the Industrial Revolution, but it enabled, these brilliant colors to be widely available.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. It takes
everybody. Yeah,
exactly. It takes what was upper echelon or only available to the people with the most money, and now everyone can have it. It was once kept from you because it was considered in a status that was, many people were beneath that status. You could acquire that, but now it is universally, very Pisces, available. I love that. That's a good fun fact, Gray. So let us pull back in time, back to kind of where we were with the Pisces new moon.
Yeah. So the point is just that's building. It's once we get to that Pisces new moon, that whole Jupiter Neptune is going to be, I think, just really intensifying from that point forward. I mean, it's already been happening, but we start getting this much more, they're getting closer and closer together.
Yeah. So basically between March 5th, when we have March 4th, March 5th, when we have the sun conjunct Jupiter, and then the sun just continues to carry on, hitting the midpoint of Jupiter and Neptune, and then makes it to Neptune on March 13th, I believe, or March 12th, somewhere around there. And so
then the sun goes across them too. Yep.
Yeah. So that period between the 4th of March and about the 13th of March, we're smack dab in the middle of Jupiter Neptune zone, and the sun basically lighting that up, which is leading us to the full moon.
And but then this is also happening right at the same time as Mars and Saturn and Venus all in Aquarius. Because when you, so that's the other side of this. So there is that whole more imaginative in that kind of way. And you can think even when we talk about Mars, Saturn being difficult in the same sign, especially the Saturn world sign, maybe there's people wanting to escape reality through that Jupiter Neptune. So there's going to be a need to kind of hold both sides. But basically, Mars is in the same sign as Saturn from March 5th to about April 14th. And Venus, it's more like March 5th to April 5th. But they each, once we were in this period, they're going to both be in the same sign. And this is a period where, now it's like Mars and Venus and Saturn, like really close together. And that's again where we could be like, oh, it looks hard for Venus, but also like what is she doing to me? If she wasn't there, it'd just be Mars and Saturn coming together.
A mediator.
Yeah.
Like she's playing her mediator role of
and in world events, I'm sure there's gonna be really difficult things happening to Venus people and ideas, but there's also, so that I'm sure will be showing up, but it also makes me think of how we just like creatively working with this. And when Mars and Saturn come together, like we've talked about before, you can really build something that's going to endure. You can really face whatever's going on. Saturn can really contain, that all that fire and heat and dynamism of Mars. Mars can kind of make Saturn move.
Yeah.
And Venus being there too. There's just a way to kind of work with all of that, hopefully more creatively.
Yeah. Well, and there's something to be said about the closing out of those cycles too. Because, the Mars Saturn, it takes some time to get through that cycle too. And it's round in the bend of what we our long-term vision and how we move towards that and what we're motivated to put our energy into. So, and knowing that happened at 0 degrees of Aquarius, on the Jupiter Saturn point. So there is, there's a bigger story that's wrapping up within that, but just the whole lead up to this full moon in Virgo on March 18th, after we've been through, the sun's touched Jupiter, it's touched Neptune. We got this Aquarius energy with Mars, Venus, and Saturn, which is also squaring Uranus during this full moon. There is, I don't know, it's kind of interesting to think about just all this visionary energy with the Pisces, with the Aquarius, and then we have 3 Earth components of the moon in Virgo trining Pluto in Capricorn, and then that activation with Uranus in Taurus. So it's interesting how we take the vision, what we see in our minds, what we see in our hearts, and how that ends up in the material plane. Because I feel like whenever we get a Virgo full moon, there's always some sort of like something's shifting with our realities, our daily reality. Something's wrapping up, something's, transitioning mutable style into what's going to be birthed into Aries season. So it's, I don't know, any thoughts, Gray, on that at all, or shall we move to Aries?
I think that was good what you said. Yeah, I think we should move into the Aries ingress because it's just kind of continuing what you're saying.
Okay, so I
think that was good. Yeah, I mean, I think because the Aries ingress basically has that Venus Mars squaring.
Yeah.
Uranus. That was one.
Let's get old Aries up here. So March 20th, 2022, the Aries ingress. So here we have the chart for Washington. We got a Gemini rising. So we've got a mutable, where last couple of years, I think our Aries ingresses have been fixed signs, keeping one chart for the entire year as like the primary chart. But when you have the mutable, we'll have Libra chart will take precedence too, right, Gray? So traditionally
Oh,
speaking.
yeah, that's true. Yeah. So we would want to, for this with being Gemini here, yeah, we probably also want to look at the Libra one having a lot of weight. It may not be like this is like the definitive chart of the whole year from that theory.
Yeah.
I was
And
just thinking like not to make, I mean, I think the people's worries about the Supreme Court are sort of reflected in this, just with like Venus in between Mars and Saturn in the ninth house. Is actually
yes.
what I just started thinking about
Yes.
relating to that. But also, the squaring Uranus, there's probably going to be lots of mobilization around that issue too, depending on whatever happens.
Yeah.
There's also the interesting thing that Mercury's like Mercury's ruling the chart and going right into that Jupiter Neptune.
And in not the
And ruling the
an
midheaven.
interesting condition.
Yeah. I mean, Jupiter's ruling the midheaven, but Jupiter's ruling the midheaven, and Mercury's going right into Jupiter. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, and side note for the US, if you picked up in the Capricorn ingress that we did for 2021, we had a 2 degrees Pisces rising. So now the rising has now moved to the midheaven in this Aries chart, which is interesting because the rising is kind of that focus of the country and its citizens, and now they are, that previous degree is now within the more of the head of state and the government, etc. So it makes me wonder the people's influence through the last 3 months and how that's translated into the agenda of the higher structures in the government, or president, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, but there's also something here where interesting where the the ascendant's ruled by Mercury in its fall. So there's something about the fallen quality of the people. But then the moon's in Libra about to go into Scorpio. So it's like one of those things, it's like it's like 7 minutes. It's like about to be a fall. Like the moon's about to go into its fall.
I know
separating from Pluto, going into the fall of the moon. So that when I think about fall, I think about, again, they kind of being brought down and that same sort of like underworld initiation and needing to go through something that is part of all this dissolution and change in the year ahead, I guess. Is what makes me think of.
Well, and the think about the last sign too, it being like the last straw to some extent too, like something there's a final last push, a last deal, it is the critical degree for whatever reason. I think about Libra too, and Libra being back to that justice issue and pushing for some sort of justice decision, fairness, equality. The fact that it's trining Pluto there in Capricorn with the structure and the government systems, and the fact that it's interesting too, seeing, because the moon is representing the people once again, and then we have the country and the citizens also being displayed as Mercury in this fallen position. But at the same time, Mercury is sitting conjunct with its ruler in its domicile. So it's fallen, but it's also very held up.
Yeah,
by
something being
Jupiter at the same time, and the people. And the being that ascendant position in the country is ruled by the same planet as the midheaven in the government there.
Right. So and the Biden administration in our country has been trying to push through, a lot of people don't like it from both sides. Some people think it's too much and some people think it's not enough, but it's kind of a historic attempts to inject money and support into some different things. And as I was mentioning, Jupiter, Neptune, we've seen this in history, in the 20th century, certainly, just kind of like Roosevelt, Obama. And so it definitely makes me wonder about that, because like the Biden administration would be that Pisces Jupiter ruling the Pisces midheaven with Mercury right there. So I don't know that, I mean, there could be something there, like something, some kind of program created to try to address stuff,
Yeah,
perhaps.
and that could be part of the contention that's happening within the court systems and the
Mhm.
just, and it could be education related, because I know he's pushing for the student loans. That's another thing that he's always talked about. Which having higher education there in the ninth, and Venus in between that, Mars and Saturn there.
Mhm.
But there's this square to Uranus that adds that,
Yeah, and
that,
the Mars is applying to Uranus, but definitely, yeah, that Venus Mars squaring Uranus just sort of setting a big tone for the section ahead, which would be
yeah,
again just like really just, and yeah, what we've been saying all along, just instead of it just being Saturn, now we got Venus and Mars joining in, giving extra Aquarian, catalyzing injection,
to
amping up the
the,
unrest
yeah,
with the Uranus. Yeah.
yeah. And spoiler
With,
alert for Libra, Uranus is back, at least here in the United States for sure. So just, this is a continuing story.
yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we should get
Let us keep
moving through
moving
more of
on.
this. Yeah.
We are going into Aries
Maybe,
season.
I guess we should probably try to go faster through these.
Yeah.
So
Well,
maybe just kind of give an overview,
we need to get,
yeah, because otherwise I'm thinking like it's gonna be a really
I
long
know.
podcast episode of yours.
And we have Gemini placements. We should be able to summarize and
Okay,
move
yeah.
along.
Yeah.
So, well, we already know that on right after the ingress, we have Mars squaring Uranus, which always adds an interesting component of unrest and just destabilization and change and just restlessness, anyways. So there is that. But let's go to that new moon, because that new moon energy is interesting. That new moon in Aries around March 31st.
Mhm.
Because we got Mars, Saturn, and Venus. They had just gone through a conjunction from like 28th, 29th, 30th. We got,
Yeah. So what's kind of interesting leading into this, we were kind of speaking to when we saw that ingress, Venus and Mars basically squaring Uranus going towards Saturn. So at this point, I think Mars is almost there, Venus is past it, but like it's really Venus and Mars coming into this new moon, just like fully setting, going from Uranus to Saturn and just setting it off as we go into this new moon.
yeah. And so what we have to take into consideration too, as Mars and Saturn make their cycle, Venus and Saturn make their new cycle. We got a starting new moon in Aries, which is always like the breath of spring, like, we're on to whatever the new is. But this is also the time too that Saturn is getting ever so close to its square with the nodes. It's basically on point for that. So
Yeah.
there is that tension of Saturn squaring the nodes, while Jupiter is also about to make a sextile position to it too. So there is opportunity for that growth and that creation and that vision. But it has the practicalities of Saturn and the limitations too. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because actually I feel like we can create the best that we can create when we have certain limits in place that allow form to be made, because it's not just all of everything, it like kind of funnels it into a direction of sorts.
Yeah. And the new moon being with Mercury and Chiron, sort of just what you're just saying, makes me think even more about that. Like, how do we kind of get into facing whatever it's really taking a look at, what are the challenges, what's not working, what are the issues, and inject. I mean, what's nice about the Aries coming in here is it's not really making an aspect with Uranus. I mean, it's just semi-sextile, but I mean, it's not making like a real major aspect. Well, I guess some people think the semi-sextile is a major aspect, but anyway,
Yeah.
what
No,
I
I
what I
feel
what
like
I what
Uranus
I
takes the
like is that
backseat.
what I like is that the Aries is at least sextiling the Aquarius. So there's sort of a yeah, hopefully there's just a thing coming in here, like the
It's like we get this.
relationships and our personal lives are really broad. This is one of the periods of the year where our relationships and things are the Saturn Uranus interaction gets very personal because of Venus and Mars going from Uranus to Saturn.
And Venus is now on her way to Jupiter too, which is
but
nice.
now she's about to go
broken
into she's about to go into Pisces, right? But it's interesting because that's going on, but at the same time that Jupiter Neptune is getting so close. And what I would hope is, yeah, that Aries, like agency and fire and spirit and ability to like to take action and create some movement and initiate something. There's a way to, yeah, in this period, like find ways to you know, move forward or face whatever it is you need to deal with.
Yeah, because I feel like this is kind of the trajectory here. So we get this new moon on the 31st, you know, 2 days later, we get the Sun Mercury superior cazimi near Chiron. So that it's interesting to add that. Earlier we were talking about Mercury squaring Chiron during its retrograde. But that being said, there's almost like this kind of like, oh, okay, I see there's, I don't know, I feel like there's some direction that comes within that. While the same time that, you know, we're getting this tension of Saturn squaring the nodes, Jupiter's getting closer to Neptune, which perfects on the 12th. We got Venus moving into Pisces to add to the Pisces party. We're moving around to a Libra full moon.
Yeah, there's something interesting. Yeah, just once we get past that Mars Saturn, there is a big change. I mean, Mars will still be right there with Saturn, but it's just kind of funny that as soon as it just gets past Saturn, finally, Venus just goes into Pisces. So the emphasis gets taken away from that Mars Saturn. Yeah, and like we were saying, once you especially get here to once Mars goes into Pisces too in mid-April, now we've got Saturn's there just in Aquarius now, and that Pisces is really, yeah, getting emphasized.
And I mean, that's
Jupiter,
kind of
Neptune.
that's almost like the first time that Saturn's like alone again.
Yeah.
Saturn's like, okay, well, I'm doing this over here. I just made it through my bending square with the nodes, you know, like it's got a lot of Saturnian action until about mid-April when everything gets a little more Jupiterian, Piscean, but also has that Aries element and the Libra element and to bring relationships back into it and justice movements and the, you know, Libra related, Venusian energy. Now that she's exalted in Pisces, we have an interesting full moon on April 16th that brings Pluto back into the fray with a T-square to Pluto. So Pluto's back.
Can't ever get away from Pluto this year.
You can't get away from Pluto. We got Mercury conjunct Uranus too.
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing is this is taking us into we're about to go into the Taurus season where the sun will be heading there. But yeah, Mercury is the first one to actually get to Uranus. But we'll start seeing that happen. Yeah. So there's more of that emphasis coming in here. And that's why a little bit after this, you know, Mercury will actually get across that north node. So like that Kala Serpa, time serpent, everything in between the nodes. This is when we're getting closer to it finally breaking out because Mercury will go over Uranus and then cross that north node and get out of there.
Yeah. So I have a feeling around the mid-April, we're going to have a pretty dynamic period because obviously we got that Venus ruled full moon. We got Pluto back in the action.
But Venus is sextile the Uranus Mercury. So it definitely seems like a full moon where you can be really working with some stuff here. And
yeah. Well, and it also elevates the Jupiter Neptune conjunction that just happened too, because, you know, the moon looks to Venus and Pisces, and then Venus looks to Jupiter there too. So there is an element of it all, especially with Mercury and Uranus and the North Node and Taurus, that it's a Venusian story, but it's also a Jupiter Neptune story that is taking place mid-April. So I don't know. I kind of feel good about that. It's got that Pluto's tension, you know, things be a changing, but at the same time, it could be rather exciting and to some degree, especially relationally, I think.
Yeah. And I don't know if you want to go into the Taurus
Yeah. So
part of the year then.
let's head on over to Taurus.
Once we get into the sun goes into Taurus, that season of the year,
There's our Mercury conjunction.
This is a period where things start getting, I mean, it's a really interesting one. I mean, there's a lot of it's basically a eclipse season starts happening, and we're going to get the first Taurus solar eclipse and the first Scorpio lunar eclipse. And we can see how Mercury is getting across that north node finally, and Uranus is getting closer to the north node, and Venus rules the north node and is going into the Jupiter Neptune. So we're going to get Mercury's also squaring Saturn. So Mercury has, in that time between that full moon and the sun going into early Taurus, Mercury moves across that Saturn Uranus square across the north node. So Mercury is sort of like the leading edge of tuning into that whole dynamic. But when we get to the end of the month, Pluto stations retrograde on the 29th, and then there's the solar eclipse in Taurus on April 30th. And it's happening basically at the same time that Venus is with Jupiter.
Yeah, it's like April 27th through the 30th. Basically the end of April. Mm-hmm. It's got a lot of juice because we have Venus, Neptune, and Jupiter all together in a conjunction. Like you said, the Pluto is stationing, and it's the dark hours before we get our first eclipse, or at least our first solar eclipse in this axis. So it's an interesting space to be in.
I mean, I think that just on personal life, this would be a period where I would hope there could be some creative breakthroughs and things like that. Certainly with Venus involved with Jupiter, Neptune too, there could be some disillusioning experiences happening. With that whole combination though, it would be most likely though, even if it is disillusioning, it's going to be revealing these like important truths that you needed to understand.
Yeah.
So this is in a solar eclipse right with Uranus. It's not like a total solar eclipse because they're a little far from the nodes, but this is the first actual solar eclipse we get with Uranus. And so that sextile by whole sign with the Venus, Neptune, Jupiter they're also basically Venus is sextile the north node and trining the south node. Mars is ruling the south node, widely trining the south node. So all the nodal rulers are in Pisces. Hopefully this is one of those like chaotic eclipses, but there's something really creative coming out of it, new forms coming out of it. All the stuff we were talking earlier about the Taurus activation of the nodes and Uranus would apply here, which again to me would be like not trying to like slow down and really process and work with what's happening here, seeing what needs to change, reformulate, revision, something. But it seems to really, I mean, I think there's a lot of it's very dynamic, and I'm personally, I like it. I like it too. I kind of like this.
I like it too. I mean, you got the benefics together, and it's like Jupiter and Venus both are working with Pluto because they're both about to sextile Pluto in the chart. There is, and it's interesting having the eclipse near Uranus because it has that Uranian component, but at the same time, there is that kind of like proximity going on that might make Uranus less jarring, not this in its like as it would be a square or an opposition, when it's closer to the Earth or whatever. It's like kind of in I know it's an outer planet, but still it's within that proximity to the sun that can kind of weaken it a little bit. We got Mercury on the upcoming Cazimi conjunction point. There's foreshadowing at this time to what's going to be seated there too. So I don't know. I've got a good feeling about this one overall. Sometimes even if there is some dips and dives to this eclipse at the same time, sometimes we are led to our greatest fortune after we let go of the things that aren't going to get us there. And so no matter, I guess all roads are going to lead to something fortunate to some extent, but there could be varying pathways on how to get there.
Yeah, I mean, in solar eclipse on Uranus, I'm sure there's going to be the same kind of Uranus Saturn theme they've already been seeing about things, sudden collapses of things and upheavals and just like rapid changes in directions. That's going to certainly be happening here. And so again, it'll be a period where we're a much more volatile collective period. So there'll be needs at times to kind of like, how do you kind of reorient to what you need to pay attention to in your personal life? And some people, whatever those big current events are, some people will be obviously wrapped up in their personal lives within them too, whatever it does end up happening. But definitely we know rapid changes and big breakthroughs happening here.
Yeah. And so how it's going to basically go down for the rest of Taurus is that basically we have the sun move to conjunct Uranus on Cinco de Mayo on the 5th of May. Then we have big news on the 10th is when Jupiter is going to move into Aries and cross the Aries point, which we'll touch on here in a second. And then we will add
and that's basically right when Mercury goes retrograde. I think it's May 10th.
Yeah.
So the thing about Mercury going into Gemini, we mentioned earlier, this means it's going to station retrograde and it's going to go back and it's going to end up going back to Taurus. So May 10th, Jupiter goes into Aries, Mercury stations retrograde pretty early Gemini. So what ends up happening is we end up with a nice Mercury will retrograde back to sextile Jupiter freshly into Aries, but like I actually feel like that's a really nice aspect for the beginning of this Mercury retrograde with sort of revisioning or getting a sense of what you want to be kind of releasing, but also making space for like the new ideas and things that want to be coming in here. Mercury being really strong in its own sign. The Cazimi will also be like the inferior conjunction with the sun will be like 0 Gemini. So it'll actually be in the sign of Gemini and hopefully a lot of really powerful new ideas seeded, that's sextiling that Jupiter in Aries.
Yeah. Jupiter and Aries, there is something to be said about fresh starts of Aries and having Jupiter there.
And that 0 degrees is close to Alcyone in the Pleiades. And I think it's kind of interesting because the Pleiades, one of the Pleiades stars is named for Maya, who's like the mother of Hermes in myth. So there's kind of a neat thing of Mercury, I don't know, being in the heart of the sun and retrograde kind of near where his mythical mom star is. But Jupiter going into Pisces, like you mentioned, it's a big deal because like the 0 Aries point is, being like this world axis point, it tends to be a thing where things really kind of manifest and are brought really strongly in. And so, it just seems like this is like a really nice place for like big ideas and vision and Jupiter will no longer be in its own sign. But Jupiter does have some affinity for the fire signs. They are diurnal signs. So Jupiter does fine in fire in Aries. It's just not in its home sign anymore. So now it's under its term of Mars.
So
it isn't. You're right. It's in its term at the beginning. So actually, nice. I think the whole first you're right. Actually, it's a great point that I think actually for all of 2022, Jupiter's time in Aries will be within its own bounds
or at least in
or
the bounds
terms.
of a benefic, with Jupiter and Venus
Yeah.
there. So that's nice. I like it. I feel like it's almost like it takes the spirit of the Pisces and what seated in Neptune, and now it's like, okay, I'm ready. I'm gonna let me go. Let me
Yeah, but being in its own bounds, it definitely has dominion there to get some things
some
done
things
for
done.
itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Jupiterian qualities brought in, and so it makes me think very much of like, especially with the Mercury retrograde coming in here, like these are like very kind of breakthrough ideas and letting yourself really kind of release what's been in the way or let go of things and change like the patterns that need to be changed and um, try to grab hold of that creative vision that's available right here of needing to bring forward through the rest of the year.
Yeah. So let us move on to our eclipse here, our next eclipse, because
Yeah.
keep in mind this is all happening during an eclipse portal where we just had
Yeah. In
our
between
first,
eclipses.
this is the end of April through mid-ish later May is very potent in the astrological story. And I'm thinking, Gray, this is what I'm thinking. Tell me if you agree. I'm thinking maybe we spend like we'll go through our Gemini and then we will just blast through some super simple stuff for the
Okay.
second
Yeah.
end of the year, and then
Sure.
we'll come back mid-year and
Okay.
do our
Yeah.
deep
Yeah.
event.
That
You want to
sounds
do
good.
that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's a good for this where we've gotten so far.
Yeah, and we can just give some quick highlights for the rest of the
Yeah.
year, and then go into much more detail like we're doing now. So May 15th, we have our lunar
Lunar eclipse.
eclipse in Scorpio. We're kind of very close to the nodes there. But most importantly in a T-square to Saturn in Aquarius. So Saturn comes into this picture to close out our eclipse portal here. But there is at the same time the luminaries are flowing with Mars and Neptune, who are about to meet in a conjunction too. So, and 0 degree Jupiter on that Aries point. So there's some interesting things going on there. What do you think, Gray?
Yeah. No. This is a total lunar eclipse, squaring Saturn. It's aligned with Uranus. Yeah, I mean, just really the massive change. Yeah,
It's
it's
a
hard for me
massive
to.
change.
It really is. This is just putting everything to a head. I mean, it's not a easy looking eclipse, but
No.
with Saturn squaring it, I mean, I feel like, yeah, it's like things get really, things get real. It's just really having to deal with whatever's going on at this point in the year. And it's going to be, yeah, just big changes relating to whatever trajectory of things are going on in your life at this point. It's interesting, like you're saying, yeah, the Mars ruling the eclipse with Neptune trining it. I mean, that's a favorable aspect. So that's something to be said. But Mars Neptune,
Yeah,
can go a lot of
Mars,
different. It can
I
go a lot of different
know.
ways, and so in
Well, we have to keep in mind that as we get Scorpio lunar eclipses, that is also the fallen position of the moon, too. So there is an interesting quality of just having eclipses in lunar eclipses in Scorpio, and then having them under the dominion of Mars and a shifty Mars Neptune in Pisces that has a diffused quality
it makes
to
me think
it.
a little bit the Taurus and the full moon in Scorpio is often associated with like the story of the Buddha, like they say
Mm.
born at a Scorpio full moon. I think the Taurus Scorpio axis like that. And with the Mars Neptune, some of the things about just trying to be really present and being in the moment with what's going on, and because that Mars Neptune could get really carried away, emotionally, and all, that can go in a lot of directions, but it could, if we can be really present and really look at what's going on. And I think that some of those qualities I sort of associate with Buddhism, I feel like actually would be helpful for this. That's like
I know. I'm like, you better get your loving kindness out, because
just really thinking about relating to this. It's a major eclipse. So like the thing I was speaking about earlier, I kind of jumped ahead to what happened after this, actually, where the Mercury and the Sun come together and they're sextiling Jupiter. So that will occur in the wake of this. When we get this lunar eclipse, Mercury is heading towards the Sun, and so this is also in the period where we're really wanting to let go of attachment to old ideas and like letting Mercury burn up what needs to be released and that sort of thing. It's also a South Node lunar eclipse, where so the Sun's on the end of the North Node. There's sort of like new growth and things coming in, but then there's something from the past being kind of released as part of whatever that Sun North Node growth aspect is, which lines up really well with Mercury retrograde at the same time.
Yeah, and it made me think of when we were like having such shining comments on the solar eclipse, and how it has those growth elements of having Venus and Jupiter together with the Taurus solar eclipse. Like a lot of times when we grow in life, we can't like hold on to other parts, and so we might be growing in the area of the North Node and that Taurus energy in our life. And there's something about Scorpio that it's like, okay, well, this is something about the Scorpio that has to be let go of, it's draining. It has to be sacrificed in the sense of Mars and Pluto, or Mars and Neptune together. Saturn's like, no, Saturn square is like, no, there's no other option. Like this is an obstacle and this has to go in order to move to what's being started with the solar eclipse. And so it can be very emotional and trying with the Saturnian component, with the Scorpio moon, but the processing, like you said, with Mercury retrograde at this time, that I don't know. I think it's in the service of the longer range picture, and so we just have to accept.
And just going back to that previous solar eclipse just for a second, with the Jupiter, Neptune, Venus, again, where I think the whole thing about this whole process, as I mentioned before, but trying to go slower and really go into things and deepen into things and understand what's going on and not be in denial, not be avoiding the issues. And just, if you're kind of working with that slower process of really getting in contact with stuff, that'll help you stay grounded. Because I think, kind of feel like if you were to, the Venus, Jupiter, Neptune, and Jupiter, Neptune could go too extreme, like out of like, you're not really connected. This is not really aligned with, you could go too far in a direction that's unbound from
reality,
parts of reality you have to really be paying attention to. So if that was going on, I feel like, that lunar eclipse scoring Saturn, it's just like,
it's gonna be like reality check.
Like that. Yeah. Reality check. Yeah, exactly. And then the continuing that with the Sun goes into Gemini, Mercury's conjunct the Sun. It's sextile Jupiter, like we mentioned. That can hopefully help sort of like as part of the recovery of this eclipse. And then basically Mercury goes back into Taurus. And as that's happening, this Gemini season is pretty early on, around May 24th, Mars goes into Aries.
There's Mars and Aries.
So now we get Mars into its sign. And I feel like this is a period where we've been in a big dissolution kind of phase. And now it's kind of like, the pace is like picking up. And how do we kind of deal? We're going to be dealing with responding to things, whatever the big change, the things that came through with that eclipse, because we get
Yeah.
Mars coming together with Jupiter.
We got, yeah, so Mars and
Venus is
Jupiter.
sextiling Saturn. There's a lot of Aries happening there. And then the sun's in Gemini.
Well, and Venus. So basically at the start here, Mars enters Aries, makes that, it goes slowly to make that conjunction. It's in proximity to Jupiter and Aries, but at the same time, we do have Venus squaring Pluto too. So there's something to be said about point. Venus squaring Pluto while we have Mercury retrograding over there in the North Node. And so Pluto's back, basically.
Yeah. So this will be Venus coming back to be in a hard aspect with Pluto again, since all that retrograde time period.
Yes. So it's kind of, it's like the opening square of her story with Pluto and that back and forth story there that she started.
Yeah, my stuff might come up from that again. I like the Mars Jupiter though, just Mars Jupiter in Aries and the sun's in Gemini. That seems like there's something there about really being able to get some more coherence about the vision kind of coming in or meaning going forward with the Jupiter and Aries. And then like you're showing here, Venus then goes into Taurus. So now we have, the Uranus again is getting, as Uranus is getting closer to the North Node, we have now Venus in Taurus coming towards it with Mercury retrograde in Taurus, squaring Saturn.
Which basically brings us to our Gemini new moon. That basically has those signatures to it, with Mars, Jupiter conjunct, Venus, and we got Mars and Venus in domicile there. Venus heading to Uranus. We got Mercury rounding the bend again with a square with Saturn, but now retrograde. So the ruler of this new moon is still retrograde and square Saturn and nearing that North Node there. So
so Mercury and right around when this is happening, Mercury and Saturn are basically stationing. And so days later, I think it's June 3rd that Mercury stations direct, and June 4th, Saturn stations retrograde. So they're both
so we got a stationing
really activated, and they're both stationing in range of a square to each other. So that gets locked in place for longer than normal with Mercury squaring Saturn. And that's happening at the same time that Venus is, inching up on Uranus you're starting to show it.
Oh yeah. I was just I'm dancing over the Mercury Saturn square. Get used to that.
Anyway, Venus doesn't get to Uranus until June 11th, I think.
Yeah, June 11th there.
So it's about a week. She gets there about a week after they station. Yeah. So when she gets there, where's Mercury? Yeah, Mercury's still, it's still basically squaring Saturn, but now it's trining
Pluto.
Trining Pluto, right?
Yeah. So that's interesting to be said about just that Mercury retrograde period in general. Is it? Once it moves back into the Earth sign in Taurus, it does a dance with the trine with Pluto, and then has that tension with Saturn there.
Yeah, so this is and so maybe people hopefully can hear a sense of how this is why I'm kind of saying not things just keep. I know everything's always changing, but you can hopefully kind of get a sense of stuff just keeps coming in. But what I like about this is it seems like stuff that's workable. Like the sun's trining Saturn, we're getting the Venus, Uranus and the North Node, but the Mercury's trining Pluto, there's, it seems like lots of stuff changing and and because Venus is in her own sign, she's receiving Uranus, she's ruling the North Node coming to conjoin us. And, it's definitely, the whole process of the whole Taurus process here gets really amplified and kind of accelerated. But hopefully it can be a really, creative time. I mean, of course, as she's coming in there to make contact with all those things, she's also then coming into the square with Saturn.
Yes.
So this is again why that Uranus Saturn square just kind of never
just
really
keeps
goes
on
away.
coming.
Yeah,
but
we keep getting connected back into it. And so relationships and our values and are all getting brought into it really strongly here. Yeah, then she goes across it in mid-June.
So she basically around mid-June, we have her. It's interesting to note at this time too, once we get to mid-June, is that we have Mercury, Venus, and Mars all in domicile. They're all in their own signs. So there is that the planetary strength going on, but she does make the conjunction to the North Node. And, you know, keep in mind, this is the ruler of the North Node. So it's something to be said when Venus crosses over it. There's a purity of mission there, it seems, but it's the same time that we have the sun trining Saturn. So we get some resolve, I think, with that, the Saturnian element and, you know, the idea of where we're creating structure and boundary in our life and what we're building, what the vision is. And Mercury's leaving its shadow phase too. So it seems nice once we get to about mid-June of like, okay, I see where this is going. We have planetary strength to get us there. Saturn's now retrograde and easing up a little bit. We've got a Sagittarius full moon that happens on the 14th of June. And so there's always that, there could be that optimism that comes in with Sagittarius energy, especially now that it's backed by Jupiter and Aries, which is more fiery. And, you know, the moon will make a trine to Jupiter and Mars in those fire signs right before. So I feel like it's a good boosting. Can be a combustible full moon too, but it's a good boosting for just enthusiasm to some respects.
I think, yeah, definitely. I agree with all that. Do you want to jump to
our roundup?
Cancer? Or yeah, or I don't know how you want to do that. Yeah, you can tell me what you want to do.
I feel like maybe I feel like what we should do. What do I feel like what we should do?
Or just end with the first. We could start with the first quarter, or just mention briefly what happens.
Yeah. So
the shape of the second half of the year.
Yeah. So basically, because I do have everything laid out here, so maybe I'll just list it off, and then whatever seems like stands out most, we'll riff on for a minute or two. But we'll go into like the juicy details.
Okay.
In another broadcast, because you know what, there's just so much to get through. And once again, we got Gemini placements. Can't just gloss over. So in Cancer season, we have basically, we're going to have a new moon that's going to be squaring Jupiter in Aries. And I can probably like do these just on the chart. We had a new moon that's squaring Jupiter in Aries with Mars in Aries squaring Pluto. So we got Pluto back on the scene again. Neptune stationing retrograde in late June and early July. So that's a Jupiterian new moon. We then have Mars moving into Taurus. So out of domicile, entering the Taurus arena.
Yeah. I mean, actually that part's big because just to note, because once that happens, Mars is, you know, it's going to be the end of July, and going into August when Mars gets there, but it starts as like Mars heading towards Uranus in the north, and they're all going to come together there. So it's sort of like, once again, like, yeah, the Saturn Uranus, the same.
We're back. Yeah, we're back.
We're back into it all getting all activated again. Yeah.
Yeah, we're back into the same thing here. So just, so of note, you know, and that is July 4th. That is Independence Day here.
Yeah.
And then actually on the 11th of
and that's
July,
right before that July 4th is within a week of the second US Pluto return. Exactly.
Which will happen on July 11th there, which basically goes on to lead us into Plutonian full moon there, where the moon is going to be decently close or on its way to Pluto, enough to where we are back at that theme again.
Mhm.
Especially while we have, so in the US, we're going to see definitely Plutonian themes that are happening. And we have to note that the North Node and Uranus are getting ever closer to each other too. So there is that Uranian component that is just happening everywhere in the world, that is adding to, restlessness, something destabilizing, activism, scientific breakthrough, just this eruption into new form. So just FYI for that. And then we have, it's interesting because at that time too, Venus is going to square Neptune around the same time on the 13th. And I just want to point this out as we get to planets. Mercury's already been here, but as we get to planets that are in the tail end of Gemini that are squaring Neptune, I feel like we're getting Mars foreshadowing, because what's going to happen later this year, that I'll just summarize now to get it over with, is we have Mars that is going to be slowing down once it gets into Gemini to be there for like 7 months. I mean, it's a really long time that Mars is going to be in Gemini, but it's going to station retrograde and in the later part of the year in October, right, Gray? Do I have that right? October.
Yeah, basically, I think so.
Yeah. And so what Mars is going to do is it's going to station, but it's going to be in a square to Neptune. So it's interesting to think about when we were talking about Mars and Neptune conjunct earlier in that lunation of the eclipse, of the Scorpio eclipse. There's something to be said about that conjunction, because there's more that's going to play out in that eclipse signature because of Mars going to retrograde with that square to Neptune on October 30th. And so any planet that rolls over this point, I feel like we're going to get some Mars foreshadowing. But I just wanted to point out that in the last 3 years now, we first had Venus retrograde in that same position, squaring Neptune. In 2021, we had Mercury in the same position, squaring Neptune. And so now this is like the last piece of the puzzle of Mars rolling over this point. And so this is not, we've had this Neptune story that has been continuing and continuing between Gemini and Pisces. And Mars is going to be playing out this last component of it in October, and November, and December, and a long time. So I just I might have derailed us a little bit there, but I figured that was the time to talk about it.
Yeah, I had an idea. I mean, you could have just, what about we just end with Mars, Uranus, North Node. or we could just try to do a really quick summary of the rest of the year.
Yeah, you gotta.
I feel like it's hard it'll be hard to go. I don't know.
It's hard to just sum it up, basically.
Yeah, it kind of is. I think it would be hard.
Yeah. So
it might be better to come back to it.
Yeah. So basically, I think once we get past that Cancer point, some of the most significant parts of the year, which we talked about earlier, were the Uranus North Node conjunction, which is going to happen, I believe, around late July.
Yeah.
Right?
So like the one thing, the Leo's been that missing piece, right? And of the Leo Scorpio Taurus thing, which makes me think a lot about, our sovereignty, our sort of coherence, creative radiance, like the good qualities of Leo, just to be kind of keeping in mind amidst all these changes happening. But yeah, once the sun and Mercury both are going into Leo, and but it's at the very end of July and beginning of August that we get the lineup of Uranus, Mars, North Node. And that'll all be happening after, Mercury will already have kind of shot through to square Uranus, and I guess Mercury is basically opposing Saturn just as that's all.
So that
Yes,
just
that's
as
all.
that's
That's just
going
that's
down.
all happening. Yeah,
And then Mars, that's another interesting thing too, is that Mars meets with Uranus and the North Node at the same time. So
that's an extra element we didn't have in those when we started off talking about that
I
alignment.
know
Yeah,
we
that
didn't.
was one piece. Makes us a little bit different, right? Because now we got a Mars. Mars is there too.
Yeah. So
With them.
and it's an interesting point because Mars starts a cycle there with Uranus too. So there is an extra, there's a lot of, there's high energy to this particular time period, especially with Mars and the condition it's in there too. So it's a little weaker, or not weaker, but
I mean, one nice thing is that Venus is in Cancer, sextiling Mars at
sextiling
least. So
Mars. I
Venus is
know.
in over there in Cancer,
And she
sextiling
is,
all of this. So it makes me think a lot about the again, we're talking about Taurus and like, be open to change, kind of work on form, that process of bringing things into form. But like with the Venus and Cancer, it makes me think of like more like intimacy and like safe containers, and when possible in your personal sphere, to be creating this like containment for this, which could be very extremely volatile and implosive type of situations kind of erupting around this. I mean, we don't know what will happen, but it's a lot of, it's extreme, like the extremity of like Taurus push to change. And
but it's like we have the support, we have the support of Venus and the people around us and our home and our family and Cancerian energy there too. And it's like the first Ptolemaic aspect after they made their conjunctions in February and March. So there's a Venus Mars story going on at the same time with the Uranus action, and Venus is the one in Cancer there that is ruling all the action that's going down with Mars and Uranus in the North Node. So it's nice that she's at least, helping.
Yeah. And it's just like the value of our relationships, the value, like really valuing relationships and relating, and like periods of this, that there's, when you have that and you've been cultivating that, and it's not all just on like material production and that at the expense of like your relationships, like times like this, you'll want to be drawing on that support, and like Venus is right there to support this.
Yeah. Remembering the support of the family and the loved ones and the comforts of the home.
But you can see here like how volatile it is, because like, but the sun, you can see here comes the sun to square that Taurus. There's Mercury opposing Saturn. Obviously Mars will then go from Uranus to square Saturn. So this is like a period where
this is a tense period.
It's really lots of stuff, happening.
Yeah. So basically, look, Leo season is going to be a little hairy, but it's also the missing piece to what has been going on. And so I think the next thing that is significant is actually when Mars moves into Gemini on August 20th.
Yeah, that would be a good point to make.
Because August 20th, I mean, it's got to be there till like March of 2023. Like that's
I looked it up. I wrote down March 26th of 2023. I think that might be accurate. I tried to look that up, and I think that's right. So from this point until late.
Pretty much March 25th is when it moves into Cancer. So
March 25th. Okay.
That is a long time. Of Mars and Gemini. And I have Mars and Gemini, and I'm like, that's too much Mars and Gemini. Oh my goodness. So this is going to be significant when we feel this shift, because it's going to be the introductory of like, what is, the Mars and Gemini story is going to be very on the scene, basically, until Mars goes retrograde August 30th, or not August, I'm sorry, October 30th. I'm just trying to get rid of it already. I'm like, hurry up, do your thing. And
what's significant with that is, of course, Jupiter is back into Pisces, then we have the Jupiter Neptune coming back together again, and then Mars is like squaring it.
Yeah. So basically, when we get into eclipse season, so when we get back into eclipse season, October, about, is it 25th? Yeah, October 25th, when we have our solar eclipse in Scorpio, with Venus right there. So she's in her superior conjunction with the sun. And this is a south node eclipse. There's like a whole bunch of things that happen basically starting this point. Because like you said, we have Jupiter moving back into Pisces on, what is it? Just a few days afterwards on October 27th, 28th. And then we have Mars stationing retrograde, essentially squaring Neptune on the 30th. So yeah. And we're right in the smack dab in the middle of eclipse season. That takes us to a Taurus lunar eclipse, exactly conjunct Uranus on November 8th. So we know this is going to be a significant time period, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. And in the way that Mars retrograde periods, though, can ultimately really get us connected to deeper desires. There's something about it squaring the Jupiter Neptune where there's also some interpretations you could have for that, I think. But if we think about this quality of aligning it to this like higher purpose, like somehow getting into touch with like this higher purpose of your Mars and how you're using your will and how can it serve these this like larger purpose within the collective. What's that meaning to uncover here? I think that could be a way of working with it.
Yeah. And it's probably going to get a little squirrely just because we do have an eclipse, south node eclipse happening, and then a north node lunar eclipse conjunct Uranus, and
it's really
Mars
tight.
and Mars conjunct, our Mars and Gemini, just in general, speaking as a native, there's a really restless quality to that. Just in general. So it could be a very anxious time with Uranian influence, with Mars and Gemini, with Mercury, making its superior conjunction with the sun in Scorpio and going over the south node. And so there's just, this is definitely a time to get to those grounding principles we were talking about earlier, and really taking your time with it, because there's probably going to be an element to this latter part of the year where we're going to want to make haste, but that can be, to relieve mental pressure, but that can actually be shooting ourselves in the foot to some extent, because there's a Neptunian quality to it, the Uranian quality to it, the Mercury on the south node. And so we just really need to take our time with this Mars and Gemini, I think.
And speaking of Mars and Gemini, it's ruled by Mercury, which is like going into the heart of the sun when this happens. So Mercury is like really in the dark, but about to be, it's going to go through the superior conjunction. So it's really working with Mercury is really in there with the mystery of this eclipse. And it's interesting to me that Ceres, just we brought her up at the beginning, Ceres, like speaking of the mystery initiations and the mysteries, she's over there in Virgo and Mercury's sign sextiling Mercury and the sun. Venus is in this, going through her long underworld journey at this point, where she's over on the other side of the sun, close to it. I'm glad you did it because I don't have time for it, but she had there's a Venus superior conjunction at the end of Libra prior to this moment, but Venus is still not visible, so there's a real like in the darkness, how are you mediating all this change and working with it, and what's the essential vision, Mars desire that can kind of come out of this and serve this like larger purpose. Take
your time with because there will be pressure, but there's so much to still be revealed. I think within all of this. And so there's something to be said about the last couple months of 2022 and how it is an interesting within sort of like waiting game. A lot is percolating, a lot is shifting, but there's still so much to be rethought in order for us to, move forward and get our heads together about it, and how we perceive things, especially since the end of the year ends in that Mercury going retrograde again.
And at the end of the year, around the solstice, I mean, by the time we get there, speaking of Venus being in the underworld here, what I like is she's coming out and she's visible. She's becoming visible as an evening star. And that's happening, you're right, just as Mercury's going retrograde. She's back with Pluto, just like we start the year, but she's also now, instead of her going retrograde, right, to go into the darkness, like we began the year, it's kind of neat that at the end of the year, she's coming out of the darkness and she's becoming the Venus evening star here, going back into Pluto once again. So I think that really speaks to the depth of the year and what could ultimately be brought forth. And just like we're saying, keeping an open mind and staying in your integrity, going, taking your time, but, all that stuff we've been talking about. Being able to relate to people, listen to people, even if you disagree with people, letting the disagreement, help you understand things more, change your mind when needed, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's but
Jupiter
I think
back into Aries too is the other thing. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
there.
Jupiter moves back into Aries around this time too. So there is this kind of at the very end of the year, after we went through a couple of months of eclipse season, obscured, Venus and Mercury, Mars retrograde, there seems to be at that point something just there's a shift that's happening that obviously the new year always brings, but in regards to a larger story that had been brewing during the year that then took a twist, at the end of October, mid-November, there is, I don't know, there seems to be just a significant shift that happens here after this particular point, but that'll be for 2023, obviously. But I do find it fascinating how we end both years, 2021 and 2022, with this Venus, Mercury, Pluto.
Yeah, and that's very interesting.
Especially since we have a North Node signature with Venus, and we're moving into Venus time. So we just pay attention to Venus, basically. Pay attention to all the planets, but there is something to be said about really following Venus's moves throughout.
Maybe we should make I know pastors, you asked about the tarot card. Maybe we should say the Empress.
The Empress. Yes, I drew the Empress today.
Okay.
Actually.
All right. There you go.
There we go.
That.
Yeah. And the Empress, there's a nurturance, there is a growth aspect, there is a mothering, there is a birth of new life, basically. That comes with it. But it's interesting. I remember Mel Moline talking about the Venus, the Empress card, and having the image of a balsamic moon and a waxing crescent on it, and how with the birth of the new, there is usually this death of the old that has to happen within the Empress.
Exactly.
So keep that in mind as we are birthing.
What's the Scorpio is the death card, right?
Right. Yes. So we have death versus So
be the Empress font, Hierophant Empress.
Yeah. So we got Empress and here. So we have the Empress and Hierophant mixed with Death and Tower. So there's some potent cards to work with, but hopefully we've shared so much.
Empress leading the mystery initiations, maybe. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is the card that I had today was with Benabel Wen's new deck, Spirit Keepers Tarot. She says the Empress is Gloria Mundi, Urania's Gate. And
nice.
That is the card right there.
That's very cool. I haven't seen that deck.
Yeah, it's I'm really enjoying it. Just FYI, it is sold out, people. So I don't want to get your hopes up if you're trying to get one, but just saying. All right. So, well, Gray, we're just gonna have to come back and we're gonna have to go for round two. Like,
Yeah, we can have another. We can
yeah.
go through it more detail later.
And we could catch up on what we said so far too, which is always fun.
Yeah.
But thanks for staying with us, people. So, Gray, where can people find you? But you got any? We kind of talked about what you had going on, but any remind?
Yeah, graycrawford.net is my site, so you can go there. I may actually create a newsletter. I mean, you can subscribe to my blog, and I'll usually do updates there. I've been talking about doing that, and if I do, there'll be some link on there to sign up for that. But on my site, you can always see when I'm doing events. I am going to be at ESAR conference in that August time period. We kind of skipped over, but following all that,
which is
Mars,
interesting.
Uranus,
Yeah, we
stuff.
said, yeah.
And there'll be some other stuff I'm doing, but you can check out my site. And there's an events page on my site where I usually will put events when they are happening coming up.
So keep on the know. And Gray's always writing intriguing things to read. So just follow him and you're going to see it pretty much. That's the way it works. So, all right. Well, where can you find me? You can find me at energeticprinciples.com and on social media, Energetic Principles too. Sign up for my newsletter if you want to get the monthly Heaven's Gate. I can't believe I almost said Heaven's. I mean, I said it out loud, so I guess I said it. The Heavenly Wind, not Heaven's Gate. It's not a cold, I swear. The newsletter that comes out at the beginning of each month, where I share detailed astrology, some tarot, some animal ambassadors, etc. So you can sign up to my mailing list to get that in your inbox. If you like this podcast, wherever you listen to it, or maybe you watch this on YouTube, you can give a review, a comment, a like, or however that works so that it can be shown and spread around for others to find it. Share it with a friend, get the word out that way. If you want to support either one of us, you could always book consultations with us, or you can use my tip jar to make a one-time donation, whatever feels right for you. And yeah, so thank you again, Gray. It's always a pleasure to chat it up with you about planetary motion.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
All right. And thank you everyone for hanging out with us this long. I'm sure you did this in probably 2 to 3 parts. We don't blame you.
I like how the sun behind me is just set into darkness and night. It fits the theme of the year. So that's actually pretty good.
Me too. We're both in the dark here. Perfect. Yeah. So, all right, everyone. Well, we'll see you about midway 2022. And until then, may the stars be with you.